Good evening, everybody. Happy New Year. I'm not sure if it's too late to say that, but welcome to the first Overview and Scrutiny Children's Committee of the year. We've got a packed agenda and it's nice to see you all here. And we'll make a start, please. So we've got some apologies for absence, and that's from the Independent, and he's been swapped with George, another independent, so welcome George. And our young person has got tonsillitis, and you were very kind to me last time when I had that, so we wish him well and hope to see him when he's feeling better. So we're looking at the item 2, which is the record.
Apologies. Also, apologies from Councillor Spring, who's unavailable this evening. Apologies.
Oh, thank you, George. We've also welcomed Barry, who is now going to be a replacement for Robbie. So welcome to our committee, Roger. Okay, item 2, records of minutes. I only saw that Damilola wasn't mentioned as not being here last time. That was the only admin issue I saw. Anybody else? Okay, item 3, urgent matters. Just to mention that this will be the last meeting for some of our head teacher representatives, and I'd like to thank Stephanie in particular, because I know she's worked really hard at getting new representatives.
Sorry, before you move on, she is here. She is listed on the minutes as being present.
Oh, they weren't on my ones. Okay.
Sorry. So
she was absent.
Oh, she was absent. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you.
That was correct, because I know I was full of illness. You weren't here last time. Thank you, Damilola. Okay, I'll take that as correct and I'll be able to sign those later. Item 3, urgent matters, which we've talked about. And then we've got pecuniary disposable interest. So this is really important that you declare if you're any school governor tonight, because obviously Rebecca and Celia are presenting related to schools. So could you please declare? Okay, George.
Thank you, Jo. I am a member of both the Beyond Schools Trust and the Inspire Partnership Academy Trust. On advice of the monitoring officer, I will declare this interest for item 5, but I will remain in the room all the time the meeting remains broad and about Medway generally. Any discussions that become more specific about either of the trusts of which I am a member of will result in me needing to leave the room. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm on the governing body of St. Mary's, Gillingham.
Thank you.
Email that I sent out, Sharon, can you just say exactly what Councillor Perfect just said now, that you will step away if discussions stray into the specific school?
I will step away if this particular school comes up in the discussion. Is that okay? Great, thanks.
And just so you know, Sharon, it's the room at the back that you need to have respite in, or refuge, if you like.
Okay, just remind me when I have to go.
Okay, and welcome Vicky. I understand it's your last meeting with us. Can I give a sincere thanks, because I know you've been on it most of the time that I've been here, and I really have appreciated, you know, your inclusivity and the SEN perspective that you bring as a head teacher of an outstanding school. And I'm so pleased you've decided to be the reserve. So it's sort of not goodbye, but fond farewells, and see you around, hopefully. Thank you.
And just to say, as head teacher of Abbey Court Special School, I am also a governor. I will remain in the meeting, but if I need to step away because of any specific discussions, I would.
Thank you, Vicky. Damalola.
So I'm a governor on the New Road Primary School governing board. If any discussions do become more specific around that particular school, I'm happy to leave the room.
Thank you, Damalola. Sorry, Councillor Turpin. I thought you had your hand up and then it went down. I apologise.
That's okay, third time lucky. I kept thinking you were looking at me. Yeah, I'm a governor of Belford Junior School, and I'm also a trust member for the Fortis Trust. So again, like others, I'll remain in the room for the agenda item, but we'll leave the room if it starts to talk about those particular schools in more detail.
Thank you, Liz. Sat.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'm a governor at the Robert Napier School, and likewise, if anything comes regards to my school, I'll leave the meeting.
Okay, thank you, everybody. That leads us into our core business of the evening, which is education. And can I start by thanking Rebecca and Celia for their work on our training this week. And I have to say, both parties that I spoke to found that really beneficial and really good that we had it so close to this meeting. So thank you for your efforts with that.
Thank you. So,
oh, I'm so sorry, Celia. I missed Esther out. Esther, can you just declare what capacity you're here this evening for, please?
Yeah, thank you. I'm here as an employee of the Lee Academies Trust and director of the Lee Institute, which is the umbrella organisation for KMT, for Thames Gateway Teaching School Hub, for the Kent and Medway Maths Hub, and for LAT apprenticeships.
Thank you, Esther. So Esther is not here in her role as a counsellor and to take questions or comments on behalf of Lee Academy Trust or any other individual academy or school. Okay, thank you. Lenny, lovely to see you. Happy New Year. I believe you might need to make a disclosure too.
Yes, so I'm head teacher of St Margaret's Junior School in Rainham.
And you'll step away if...
I'll step away if there's a conflict when it comes to that point. But you might need to tell me, Chair, if I need to step away if I don't do it on my own accord.
Thank you, Lenny, I will do. Rebecca Smith and Celia, Education, over to you. Thank you.
thank you. And really impressive to see so many of you represented on our governing bodies, which is really crucial for the importance of our education quality in Medway. So we've got the annual schools performance report for you tonight. It is earlier than it usually comes out. It usually comes to you in March, so we brought it earlier because it's important to see that data. The a proportion of the data is unvalidated. That means it hasn't been completely agreed by the DFE, but we see very little variance usually between the unvalidated and the validated. So we felt it was important to share this. The unvalidated data that you have has been published by the DFE and is in the public domain. And the report covers the items that you can see on the slide. So an overview of the performance for Medway schools across all key stages, from early years foundation stage up to key stage 5. It is the performance from the academic year 2022 to 2023, so the exam series, the final exam series that was taken in July last year. You'll see each of those are broken down by various vulnerable groups. There is an extra section in this report on our children in care and SEND and disadvantaged. It also gives you an overview of permanent exclusions and suspensions and absent, which is what the DFE call it, as opposed to the attendance. However, you'll notice that that data is even more lagged in terms of what you have. So this is the report for 22-23. So some of that data is even before that because of when it is published by the DFE. It also includes not in education, employment or training and the new measure on destinations. So, forgive me 1 sec, mouse to work. Nope. There we go. So there are 243 early years providers, 102 schools and 1 FE college in Medway. And you can see the percentages there of those that are good or outstanding. So 94% of early years providers, 92% of primary schools, 88.9% of secondary schools and 100% of our special schools, alternative provision and FE college are judged by Ofsted to be outstanding. In terms of our performance headlines, our early years foundation stage, children achieve a good level of development and that performance has improved since 21-22, so since the previous academic year. For phonics, both in Key Stage 1 and 2, these outcomes have improved on the previous year. However, they do still remain lower than pre-pandemic levels and lower than national levels. In Key Stage 1, the percentage of children achieving the expected levels in all of reading, writing and maths has improved, and particularly in writing and maths, those scores have improved at a greater rate than national improvements. However, in Key Stage 2, there is a decline in the percentage of children achieving expected levels in reading, writing and maths compared to a national improvement. So nationally that has improved. And Key Stage 2 reading scores particularly have declined and are now 5 percentage points below national. For Key Stage 4, we've returned to the same levels of entry to the English Baccalaureate that we were pre-pandemic. Our Attainment 8 score is broadly in line with national. The percentage achieving grade 5 and above at GCSE in maths and English fell both in Medway and nationally. But our performance is still below national. And our Progress 8 score is minus 0.1, and which is a slight improvement on the previous year, but the national is minus 0.03, so we are still well below national. It is worth saying that the one measure that probably changes most from unvalidated to validated is the progress, because it drills down into slight tweaks in individual children. But we remain below national on that. For Key Stage 4, our average point score on entry for all of our measures, so for A-levels, academic entry, general entry, technical level entry, have all declined further. And in all of those measures, we remain below national averages. And the percentage of children achieving AAB in 2 facilitating subjects, so at least those subjects being facilitating, again has declined further and remains below national. Obviously, we have 80% of our schools as academies, and I know that a lot of questions come out, and academies are accountable to the Department for Education, the Regional Director and the Regions Group in terms of school improvement and performance standards, etc. Now, we haven't got a representative from the Regions Group with us this evening, and Esther has very kindly come and is going to just run through a few slides on the Lee Institute, which is an organisation that works with schools and partners and is funded by the department. So I'm going to hand over to Esther.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Chair, for having me. I won't speak for long, but obviously, if there are any questions at an appropriate time, I'll be happy to take them. So really, when we saw the move to academisation, there was a government push to ensure that funding remained for professional development at a local level and increasingly at a national level. And the real focus recently has been making sure that professional development is available wherever schools are and whatever academy trust they are in, or if they are with an LA. And so increasingly, as that funding and that steer has come, a variety of different funding streams have come about for that work. And I wanted to take you through the 4 different areas that are focused particularly through the Lee Institute. So just to give you an overarching picture first, At Lee Academies Trust, we are fortunate enough to have been awarded or to have sought designation in 4 of these areas. And we recognised in June this year that we were working in very similar ways with our partner head teachers, and I'm delighted that there are colleagues here that I know that we work with. And we really wanted to be that resource for schools in recognising, as the DFE have said, that one of the greatest ways of improving performance is to invest in teacher development. And so we're really looking at that upskilling and training our staff, and significantly at recruitment and retention at every level. And so we wanted to be that kind of resource that a head teacher could pick up the phone, and anything they needed in terms of their staffing, we were there for them to have when it came to training. So if you wouldn't mind clicking on for me, Celia, thank you. What I'll do is just talk you very briefly through this slide, because the 4 organisations are slightly different and do slightly different things, but I hope what you'll see is a pathway through. So the first thing we talk about all the time is this essential need for recruitment and retention of excellent people into this amazing best job in the world. And so KMT is a 30-year-old plus school-centred initial teacher training. It provides the kind of school direct route into teaching, which is funded predominantly by people self-funding or using the kind of student loan to pay for that. Some cases it's funded through a salary at school and the schools pay the fee. We recently have introduced an apprenticeship route into teaching, and we have an increasing number of colleagues going through the 12-week assessment-only programme, which is for colleagues that have been teaching for at least 2 years as an unqualified teacher. It's obviously a 1-year programme. It is in primary, secondary and SEN. We've had a good Ofsted, very strong Ofsted fairly recently, not to say last year, but the year before. We've got about 240 on our programme this year. That makes us one of the largest nationally, we believe, but certainly one of the largest in the region. And we stretch all the way from Thanet into South London, into Sussex, but really predominantly based across Medway and Kent. When then someone has taken their first year and they've been awarded qualified teacher status, they now have to undertake a 2-year induction process. And that is offered through Thames Gateway Teaching School Hub. So KMT, colleagues pay for their training. The Teaching School Hub is a designation from the DFE where we're given a 3-year designation, and we're just in the process for, we hope, another 4 years, and we'll find that out fairly shortly. This is a grant fund for a number of strands of work. As I say, the first and largest of that is the early career teacher. So we do 2 things. One is we are the appropriate body. We sign off the induction, and we agree with the assessment of the head teacher. We moderate that work. The second is that we provide the professional development programme, the early career framework, and I've put in the pack more information about that, so that at the end of the 2 years, wherever you are in the country, you've had access to that fantastic start. We then have the offer of national professional qualifications. These are a whole suite of training in specialist areas: leading teaching, leading behaviour and culture, leading teacher development, and then a number of leadership courses, so leadership of early years, senior leader. You may have heard of the NPQH, the National Professional Qualification in Headship, executive leader. At the moment, these are fully funded for almost all schools. This is the last round and closing date in a few days for that, where we are certain the funding will be there. And again, we're awaiting the next announcement from the DFE about that funding. And we then support wider professional development. And in lots of areas, we've worked together with Rebecca and Celia and the team to put that training on bespoke to Medway. We then have the Maths Hub. There are 87 teaching school hubs in the country, and Thames Gateway is Medway, Gravesham, Dartford. There are 40 Maths Hubs, and the Kent and Medway Maths Hub, also grant funded, is one of the 40 for Kent and Medway. The predominant focus there is on teaching for mastery in mathematics. So this is a kind of, you know, it's not just for Christmas, it's for life, you know, approach to small groups of schools working together to look at the very best learning and what makes excellent teaching in mathematics. Schools join us at the very first stage, mastery readiness or development programme, and then they each year work with us on a journey. And we also offer things like training for TAs, subject knowledge enhancement, that kind of work. And then the most recent addition to the family is an apprenticeship provider. We offer 7 standards, but we have recently looked at how this looks in the umbrella of the Lee Institute, and specifically how we can take the work of the apprenticeship and make it appropriate for schools in training their support staff. Because what I've shown you here is a journey through from ITT, early career teacher, national professional qualifications, into the SEM programme that's coming, into being an executive leader, but less for our fantastic support staff. And so this is about taking business administrator, teaching assistant, property maintenance operative, ICT support technician, and allowing schools to use, particularly where they're larger trusts, their apprenticeship levy to train their support staff in that same excellent way. So just to kind of share that work with you, and thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you. I'll open up for questions. George?
Yeah, thank you, Joe. And thank you very much, Celia, for the presentation, but also thanks very much you, Esther, for the presentation as well. And I know the work, certainly, that the Lee Institute does, and indeed the Lee Academy Trust, and I know Simon Beamish is doing lots of great work with you and his team, so that's really good to hear, so thank you. A couple of questions I've got, Celia, particularly around some of the sort of broad themes of the report. I mean, first I'm disappointed that the DFE haven't attended, and I know myself and Joe share that, and there's certainly cross-party concern about the fact that the Regions Group aren't here and haven't even bothered to send a representative, and I think it needs to be minuted that the council, you know, and I think all sides of the council are very disappointed with that. I know certainly I'll be making that known to the local members of Parliament, our concerns about that, 'cause it's very disappointing because the government should be providing somebody up here to be able to front up that when they're responsible for these academies. Just a couple of concerns. So one of the key things I've noticed in the report, one of the things actually when I go out and talk to head teachers and CEOs is actually pointed out within the census data within the report, which is identified on page 2. Which is around and it's in the top left, obviously the deprivation sort of census, and the fact that in this report we've ranked 68th, showing a 20-place deterioration and deprivation has increased, which is very concerning, particularly as we come out of the pandemic and school life begins to normalise. I just wonder what specifically we're doing to drill into this and look at the implications of some of this on our children and young people. I know we've got a number of academies, both at secondary and primary, but also a number of our maintained primaries that are operating at around 50%, if not higher, levels of children on pupil premium free school meals. And I'm just wondering, particularly in some of our schools where they have got very high levels of deprivation compared to national indicators, what we're doing from a council level, both in terms of the powers that the council has to support those children and young people, but also in sort of convening power with, you know, the police and other partners around that piece. And specifically, if there's any sort of outcomes you're seeing on any of this sort of, particularly the census data in terms of making the context more challenging or difficult within the schools. Secondly, I just wondered how are the council finding engagement with the DFE more broadly? So just be interested to know how we're sort of seeing, particularly in light of some of the challenges recently with schools that we've had. Just how is that engagement working, and how do you, from an officer level, find that with the DFE? And then just finally on exclusions, and I know this is, if you talk to school leaders, obviously they have one side, but obviously there is another side, which is that exclusions are too high. And I know this is both a challenge that you're trying to grapple with, but also when you talk to heads, they'll tell you actually some of the challenges of these are very extreme behaviour, very challenging behaviour. I just wondered what you're doing in terms of engaging with head teachers and CEOs on that, and what the reaction you're sort of seeing from education leaders in terms of trying to drive those figures down. So yeah, thank you.
Okay, if we take Adrian and then Smither, could you then do the questions that way, Rebecca and Celia? Thank you.
Thank you, Joe, and thank you, Celia, for the presentation this evening, and also thanks for the really brilliant session we had on Tuesday evening. That certainly was good for all of us and stretched our minds so much so I don't think any of us could find a question to ask at the end of it, which was, I felt a bit shamefaced. But I must confess, I'm sitting here looking at a report that's got a huge amount of detail, and really good detail, and breaks young people down into various categories, and you can see how the different sections of our community perform better than others. But the nagging thing that's in my mind is, well, what can I do with this information? Because it's become very obvious that the regional directorate do not want to engage with us. So we can't use this information at the moment to hold them to account. So what can we actually do with this information that's been, it's brilliant stuff. Don't get me wrong, I'm 100% in favour of learning for the sake of learning. Lifetime learning is, education is just not for the young either. Thank you, Mark, because we've had this discussion before. But a cynic would say education sometimes wasted on the young. But it does worry me that we've got all this fantastic detail, but we seem to have so limited powers of what we can do with it. It would be nice to have from officers. I've been on the council for a long, long time, but I should probably know this, but I don't, because what, as a scrutiny committee, what can we do with this? How can we make this fantastic data that we've got here in front of us this evening work to make things better for our young people? Thank you. I might want to come back if I may, Joe, but certainly that's the point I want to get over first.
Okay, Smither, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I second all the compliments and thanks that have already been said. I don't want to take up time, but yeah, thank you. I have a couple of questions. I'm going to try and kind of condense them and be concise. Attainment-wise, we seem to be doing better at early years, and then it kind of tapers off as we get into secondary. I just want to know what your thoughts on what happens there. Is there any practice at the early years that's working that can be somehow adapted towards older years? I mean, what's working well at early years, basically, that's so successful? Also, looking at the data being split by ethnicity and gender, it is very interesting to look at that. But no matter what measure you look at, white boys seem to kind of come lower in all of the measurements, whether it's at phonics or, all the way from phonics at primary to university admissions and employment, all of that. So I wonder if there's any targeted approach possible towards that. I mean, to understand the factors behind that. This is a little bit sort of counterintuitive. You'd think things like phonics would come easier to children who are in an English-speaking environment, perhaps. But so it's interesting, I think, for us to know what's behind that. And generally, in terms of the attainment, there is an overrepresentation of SEN children who are achieving lower attainment levels, and children on free school meals. I think George has already touched on that deprivation issue. So I feel like we're letting our most vulnerable kids down in this setup, because we have to be aspirational. We have to help the children bridge that gap, because they're starting out at a disadvantage if they are coming from a low-income family or if they have additional needs. So we have to try and bridge that gap so that we don't see, you know, it's about equality of opportunities for everybody so that they can get to that state. So again, what are we doing about that? What's the strategy around that? In terms of the Russell Group and Oxbridge admissions, when I was at university, I was involved in a peer mentoring scheme where I don't know how useful I was, but it was really interesting to go into school and speak to a child in sixth form and generally support them through to say what life at university is like, what they can do, you know, to aspire higher. I wondered if there's a scheme like that around and how that looks. And just finally, one question on suspensions and exclusions. Again, Joe just picked up on this. There was an article recently on BBC, which basically police data has been released, which shows that more than 50% of perpetrators of sexual abuse on children are in fact young people themselves. So it's under 18s who are something like 52% of them. So that's really worrying. And in the figures here, we can see that there are actually some numbers against suspensions and exclusions for sexual misconduct. So I want to know exactly how many children we're talking about. And how are these children being supported after exclusion, especially? What happens to them? Because we can't just kick them out and send them out with seriously destructive behavior like that. How are the children who are victims of this supported? How is generally the cohort, the year group supported through it? Yeah, that's it really. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Celia or Rebecca?
Thank you. So I'll make a start, and a number of your questions overlap, so I'll try and be as concise. So firstly, the Regions Group, the Regional Director, they are happy for us to take questions and send them to them, and they will come back with a response in that way. And generally with the DFE, so we have very close working with them in terms of the organisation of academies, you know, and if we have serious concerns about a school, we can speak to them. We do speak to them regularly, and they will have those conversations with the school. So that is very much there. In terms of the deprivation, the difference in our cohorts of children, we have obviously gone through a significant amount of work to support inclusion, and that is putting extra funding into the school. We have a range of wraparound support for schools now. We have reviewed our alternative provision. So the alternative provision or offer for children, if a child is excluded, they end up in one of our alternative provisions. Both of those are good or outstanding. We've stopped using that broader independent offer, which wasn't as good, so we are absolutely focused on quality. We have programs that are now focused on reintegration, so an 8 to 12-week placement that supports a young person back into school, so rehabilitates, for want of a better word, and puts those young people back in. You're absolutely right in terms of where we have significant deprivation. We, particularly in those areas, those schools deal with the biggest challenge. They are also actually, by and large, our most inclusive schools, and they get the additional support from the local authority where they're building additional provision like nurture units, etc., in the school to cater for the need. What that isn't showing yet is an increase in the outcomes. But for me, the best measure, once we've got the progress measure, because that is recognising that some of those young people come in on a lower starting point, but they make the same progress. Before I go on to what we do with data, and I'll pass to Rebecca for that, in terms of we use it to absolutely analyse our cohorts, to identify some things that we can do, and to have conversations with individual schools. You know, that kind of gap at early years, Key Stage 1 is okay, and the gap widens as we get wider. And we look at our, say, facilitating A-levels, a very small cohort, which is really, you'd say that's surprising. We have a selective system. We take off the most academically able children. There are lots of programs like that in our grammar schools in terms of the peer Russell Group universities, really focused on that. If my opinion is that only 23% of children access those, and there may be something about that's why our averages are lower, because we have some exit really high, but what happens to the others, and where is that aspiration? And that's why that gap seems to widen as you get older. The white boys, that's a national trend in terms of white boys, and part of that is about that inclusion work. It's about it's kind of generally the culture and the environment that they're in at the moment. They are the group that are overlooked in schools. That's a national thing. So some of that inclusion work, working with those young men, and actually a lot of our alternative provision data, I don't have the stats on me, but a lot of that is white boys that are getting that additional intervention and that additional outreach. So yeah, in terms of what we do, so we do very clearly use this data to categorise our schools. Rebecca, do you want to pick that up in terms of your team's work?
Thanks, Celia. Starting off with that point, the risk assessment enables us to be able to look at 12 performance measures for all of our schools, and we break down not only just the information that we've been looking at this evening in terms of performance by attainment and progress, but all the different vulnerable groups as well. We look at the levels of suspension or exclusions, we look at attendance, we look at the overall number of factors of inclusion as well within that risk rating for all of our schools, and we share that information obviously with schools, but at the same time with a number of schools it underpins quite a thorough and more detailed conversation both on an individual school level, but more collectively we've been working closely with our head teacher associations at primary level, the Medway Education Leaders Association known as MELA, and Medway Secondary Head Teachers Association as well. And when we think about a report that we're looking at tonight, why have we written it? We've written it obviously to share it with you, but it's really to furnish schools, and by that I mean leaders so they can work with their teachers, but it's also to furnish governors, and I'll come on to governors in a moment in more detail, but it's to furnish all those people with the detailed overview so they can have more thorough conversations to say, this is the performance of Medway pupils, how does that look in our school, obviously compared to Medway's cohort and then nationally, and what's the journey of improvement, what are our challenges. And in relation to the point that George made earlier around the Adaki profile and thinking about how schools are using their pupil premium funding to support some of their most vulnerable children, then schools will produce on their school websites a very detailed and comprehensive breakdown about how they're using that money and how they're targeting the support, the intervention, the teaching, the welfare of those young people and students in their school. But it comes back to using this information so they can have a gauge of where they sit in relation to neighbouring schools and what that comparison is to the national picture. I had a head teacher last week only call me and just again ask if there was an updated version of the Adaki profile, because he'd found that very useful with his governing body last year in being able to have those conversations. I'll just come back to a point I made earlier about working with governors. We have a Medway Governors Association, which is really in its infancy, and we're very keen to be able to engage more governors in that association. And that's an independent body of governors that was brought together only just approximately about a year ago to look at a number of issues which governors felt would benefit from a greater level of engagement with Medway Council. And we've already done some presentations with those governors around SEND funding, EHCP. We've looked at health issues, we've looked at the performance and the attainment and the progress of pupils over time, and unpicked more detailed information that we have in front of us here, but with a smaller forum to encourage a greater level of scrutiny. And I'd encourage anybody that is a governor here tonight to think about coming along to those Medway Governors Association meetings, because it's a really good opportunity to go into it in more detail and make sense of it for your own individual schools or trusts. As a council, we also provide a briefing to the education people in Kent who manage part of our statutory responsibilities for working with our maintained schools and their governing bodies, and we provide 3 briefings each year where we have a question and answer session. We look at again things like latest issues coming up in Ofsted, and our performance issues sometimes for those most vulnerable children as well. So a whole raft of intelligence and communication to enable governors to be able to scrutinise their performance with their school leaders in more detail, but coming out of regular communication with council officers. Just wanted to move on to the point that was raised in relation to the performance of early years children and what's going well there, and how that compares to the performance in other key phases across the primary and secondary sectors. I think that early years, and coming from an early years background myself in my initial training and teaching years, it's passionate, it's about that curriculum. It's about knowing those children well and being able to really tailor that curriculum to the strengths and to the needs of your students and your young people in your care. And what we're seeing, particularly in the last round of, well, not the last round, the last Ofsted framework, which is due to be slightly amended and updated as we move into a new Chief Inspector that began with us in January, is a greater focus on the quality of the curriculum in all phases, in primary and secondary. And we really welcome that, because the schools that have done the journey in thinking about how are we tailoring our curriculum, given the information that we have in front of us in terms of data, to meet the needs of our students, whether it be a student with particular SEND profile, a vulnerability in terms of their own background, or in particular subject areas, then they should be tailoring their curriculum. And there's a lot of work going on in schools. And I think that until we see that journey completed, the tide won't turn. I'm not going to wave my magic wand, but the tide will continue to strengthen. I think that's where we've seen a richer performance in our schools, where they've been on that curriculum journey to really tailor the curriculum in great detail, as a lot of our early years settings have done previously. Just going to pause and think there's anything else I was going to talk about for a moment. No? Celia, I think I'll pass back to you just for a moment.
That's fine.
Okay, thank you. We've got a couple more questions, if that's okay. So can I do them in three again? Damilola, then Liz, then Lenny. Thank you.
Okay, just wanted to thank you for the presentation so far, first of all. My question was actually around early years, and you mentioned in the report that children on EHCPs perform less well. Why are we seeing that, or do we know why we're seeing that? Because it says continue, so I imagine it's been happening for some time. And what are we doing to try and turn that around?
Liz, your turn.
Thanks, Jo. Yeah, I mean, my sort of questions were very much probably what's already been asked this evening. So just trying to sort of, I guess, drill down a little bit more into that. Looking at the sort of the free school meal data, I mean, there's data around the fact that I think it's about 6%, I think, that are eligible but not claiming. So I'm wondering what can be done about that. I don't know if it's sort of local authorities or the school, or what discussions we're having. Sort of what discussions we have with head teachers regarding sort of this deterioration in, you know, the key stage 2 and onwards. It's really concerning, because I just look at this data and just see that sort of, you know, with children entering early years and key stage 1 sort of doing well and sort of having this potential, and then it feels like we're failing them because they're leaving school, you know, not reaching that potential, sort of by looking at this data. So, you know, what discussions are we having with head teachers, holding them to account? Good to hear that the work with governors, because I think that's important, that the governors can, we ensure that they know that how their school compares nationally, so that they can sort of be holding leaders to account. But also what sort of discussions they can have school leaders with wider areas. So obviously if we're looking at just Medway data, we need to be taking this out to sort of other local authorities and see what are they doing differently, to see, you know, why is our data deteriorating. I understand that we always will have to rank somewhere as a local authority, and of course we always want it to be, you know, as good as it can be, but it's the fact that it's the deterioration that concerns me more than anything. And I had one other, my other sort of point, a question I wanted to ask was regarding the SEN data. I think it's really complex data to look at, and I'm just wondering how best that can be presented, because I'm just wondering if, you know, this might be something that Vicky can input into as well. I mean, having a child at an SEN school who was not going to be taking any exams or GCSEs, and of course I'm not looking at sort of, you know, trying to rule out children, but I'm just wanting to make the data as good as possible, where, you know, these are children that are going to be taking sort of phonics tests and, you know, Key Stage 2 exams and GCSEs and things, rather than sort of putting all of SEN children in, and then it makes the data potentially worse than it should be, if that's making sense. Thank you.
Okay, and Lenny?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Celia and your team, for all your hard work. It's really appreciated, and nice to see you here, Esther. And I think as a head teacher, who our results for maths have improved, and that's obviously we've worked very hard, but we've been part of the maths hub, and it's been really significant in terms of improvements for us. So thank you for your hard work on that. Just a couple of questions. In the report, it mentions that Key Stage 1 SATs are no longer statutory and schools will no longer be submitting their data. So from things that have been mentioned this evening about holding schools to account and monitoring and tracking, what will that look like for Key Stage 1 going forward? And also, you mentioned that 80% of schools within Medway are academies. Is there a breakdown of how academies are performing in comparison to LA maintained schools and vice versa? And is that maybe an in with the Regional Schools Commissioner about performance? Following on from that, are there plans or a strategy for, or scope for, schools to return to being LA maintained, or is the plan for more LA maintained schools to become academies going forward in Medway? Those are my questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Celia and Rebecca?
Thank you. If I can just start with the wider intended use of the report. This report will be shared with the head teacher associations, and part of Medway Education Leaders group with representation from all the different phases of education in Medway is central to looking at a report such as this, and to encourage both head teacher associations to form an action plan, my words, not theirs, but form an action plan to address those core priorities and work together collectively, sharing best practice. The role of local authority officers in terms of being able to furnish data and help with the analysis and the disaggregation possibly of SEND performance pupil data at a school level and at a possibly trust level or geographical region level. That can certainly be something that we can offer to do, and we have over time and done various strands of that work. But that's pivotal in terms of encouraging schools to support one another using the information that they can glean from the local authority and be furnished with that, but at the same time work collectively together to share best practice and to talk about how they're overcoming barriers. And I know that an awful lot of that work goes on already, but I think the challenge is given in the Medway Education partnership group for more of that to be done and to really make use of the data that we do have to address some of those areas of concern that we've highlighted. In terms of looking at the early years children and the point that was made by Damiola around those with an EHC performing less well, again, this year particularly, we've really made every attempt to be able to help present data, thinking about those particular SEND groups, to present that and disaggregate data to aid schools in that analysis, because the DFE provides a certain amount of data for them to be able to help their own self-analysis. We needed to do that on a local basis, which is what we've presented. But I will be speaking to Medway Education Leaders Association and also the Secondary Head Teachers Association to be able to help them furnish that and do a closer examination of that piece of work, particularly for other groups, obviously not the early years in secondary. Lenny, you made the point about Key Stage 1 SATs no longer being a statutory requirement from the government, and our offer to our Key Stage 1 schools and groups certainly continues in terms of working with them to furnish moderation exercises so there can be that consensus of assessment and processes if they would like to work together. But again, it will be in partnership with the head teacher associations working within groups of schools together in their zones or in their ward areas. Whilst obviously it's been removed from the government agenda to collect that Key Stage 1 SATs information, we do know that schools are intending, and rightly so, to gather assessment information, not in a formalised way, but in a teacher assessment way, which is deemed more appropriate to the age of children in the youngest parts of primary school. So we'll still have an active role in being able to do that in partnership with schools moving forwards. Celia, can I pass over to you?
Yeah, thank you. I'm just going to pass to Esther, who's just going to give you a bit of an update in terms of the training that we're doing for staff in terms of improving SEND performance.
Yeah, thank you. I think it would be really helpful for the committee to know some of the evidence base in terms of the conversations we've had about comparison with kind of national and basing that work. So we've worked closely together on 2 courses which are embedding research from the Education Endowment Foundation, and one is making a difference for disadvantaged pupils, and the other is supporting pupils with SEND in mainstream schools. And in both those cases, we've had to bid to the DFE for permission to run that course, and they've used this data and local data to evidence the need for that course to run, and also looked at the evidence base of what's then being delivered to staff. So I thought it would be really helpful for the committee to know that. And alongside that, we're not the only hubs running. So there is then the phonics hub, the behaviour hub, which are also being offered to schools in Medway to kind of bring in that support. So it would be helpful just to add that there. Thank you.
Thank you. And then you asked about the academisation and LA maintained split. We used to publish them separately. We removed it because we felt, we are collectively responsible for the children in Medway. And actually, the number of LA maintained schools is so small that it's not necessarily a good comparison. But obviously, we do have that data that we can share with you if you would like, and we very much use that for our LA maintained schools. In terms of LA academies returning to be LA maintained schools, that's not the current administration's view. We support schools in making the best decision for their children, whether that be to join a trust or stay with us.
Thank you. Leah, then Mark, and then I'd like to ask as well.
So I had 2 questions. Both of them have been sort of touched on, but they're slightly different angles to it. So with the SEN and ECHP thing, that was the measure where we seem to be the furthest away from national on quite a few of the metrics. So I wondered, just as a parent who is currently considering whether to apply for an ECHP for my SEN child, I wondered why we are so far away from national. Is it that they're not being robustly written enough? Is it the schools need help adhering to them? I just can't understand where that's come from. And then a similar question was that across the board, we were mostly outperforming national in 2019, and then we seem to be quite commonly underperforming national. So obviously that is most likely lockdown related, but why are we recovering slower than the rest of the country? I think that was it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. A couple of points. I'm not entirely sure it's a satisfactory answer for the DFE to say, put your thoughts in writing and we'll respond. I would have thought it's an essential part of working with local government to be able to attend meetings such as this and hear the exchange of views with officers, which I'm told go on as a matter of course, between the DFE and officers. You know, councillors have a role in all this, and to hear what councillors have to say, and even to be able to ask the regional director questions. I'm sure we could accommodate in terms of dates. The regional office might well respond that they can't be in Medway when they're in Brighton or something like that, but I'm sure we could be accommodating and possibly have a special meeting. Chair, I throw that out there, not knowing whether anybody will agree with it, but you know, we could be flexible with dates at a time that the regional director was perhaps anyway in Medway and could make a meeting of the sort I described. Having said all that, please can officers give me some guidance if I wanted to put a written question as to how I should go about that. Should I write via the committee clerk? And perhaps I can be advised on that issue. What was said about the curriculum at early years level interested me considerably, because what we've been talking about today is progress of students as they go through the school system and falling off the further they get secondary and beyond stage, past key stage 2. It makes me wonder, are we doing all the right things at early years? Do we need, for example, to strengthen even more the emphasis on literacy and numeracy and the time given to that? Because outcomes was quite rightly mentioned by the Assistant Director, and the way we measure those outcomes and progress in later years is surely dependent on how good our offer is at early years.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. I mean, obviously, my questions are, you know, I know we're just talking about Medway, but the statistics this week released, we've got 4.2 million children in poverty under this government, and actually that's 29% of children, which is 9 in every class of 30. If you're hungry, you're not going to be learning at your best, because obviously you need fuel or food to think. I know some of our schools are really good at the wraparound care. But obviously, I wonder, you know, does that come at a cost? And then what impact, Rebecca, that might have on school attendance? The other thing, I know the virtual school head teacher isn't here, but obviously child in care attainment has dipped. And I just wondered if I could root into that a bit more, whether, you know, that's because I know sometimes our children in care, you know, for different reasons end up having to be moved, or parcel children, or, you know, educated outside Medway. Does that have an impact on attainment? Is that a question that we might need to be deep diving into and just concerned and getting answers about? I agree with Mark about the response from the Regional Schools Officer Council, whatever they're called. But I would like to say I'm also worried about the data Key Stage 3 onwards, because I wonder how good our schools are at transition, lessening that regression at transition, and what they're doing to support those children, especially post-pandemic, because there's quite a lot of dips, Key Stage 3 onwards. But I don't know if you have those answers for me, please.
Thank you. So I'll start on that. So in terms of the SEND data, it is really difficult, and actually Councillor Turpin made a reference to it there. The national published data is all children with SEN, and obviously the level of need and learning need of children with SEN varies considerably. So, you know, we have 100% of our special schools are good or outstanding, and Vicky might come in on that. And actually, to be able to disaggregate the progress of SEND by need type is very difficult. Those statistics aren't published nationally. So it is very difficult because you are then saying, well, what proportion of our children have a particular need compared to the proportion of that need represented nationally. So you do have to take it with a pinch of salt. However, you're right, we do sit below national, and that's where we have to look at individual schools and say, actually, what is the tracking data for those young people? What is reasonable and appropriate? And what is listed in their EHCPs as outcomes? So it is more nuanced. We have, if your point about lockdown, so we have dropped below national. During lockdown, we had a higher level of absence than national because of COVID. And our persistent absence was higher as we came out. So arguably you could say, well, our recovery then from the lockdown has taken longer. Our attendance figures are actually now improving and improving quite quickly, but actually they've improved quickly nationally. We're just a bit slower, but we are getting there. So it may well be that we had higher persistent absence, and that is now taking the need to support that to get our young people back in and for us to bounce back. And you're absolutely right in terms of strategy. So we are working on a literacy strategy. We can really focus on some of the things that we can use our levers around, and a lot of work is done across the council and across a number of departments, in child-friendly Medway with our libraries, really focusing on literacy. So we are developing a literacy strategy for the council. We did some work around reading last year that had a focus. So actually picking on the things that we can do. And I'll pass over to you in a second, Rebecca, but just in terms of the virtual school, so those of you who sit on the partnership board for virtual school, which is a partnership board of head teachers, will know that, I took over the chairing of that earlier in the year, and the virtual school is moving from the social care directorate to the education directorate, so we can absolutely have a look at those young people. And they're small numbers in terms of a particular year group taking a particular cohort of exams. So you do have to look at the pupil level detail to really understand whether that is appropriate for that, if that was a good year for that year group or not, rather than the kind of general, because of the numbers that we have in each year group. But that is moving across to education, so it absolutely gets that focus. Rebecca.
Thank you. Just to add a couple of points to the literacy strategy, for example, Celia, when you talked about the reference to working with child-friendly Medway and libraries, I'd add to that there's an engagement obviously with our partners in public health with that work, as well as our Ed Sykes and our colleagues from adult education coming together, all already collating their thoughts and their views as to what the offer is currently and what the needs need to be moving forward. And I take Joe's point on board in terms of thinking about an angle possibly within that about transition might be a really helpful part of that work as well. I wanted to add just a point that was made about that poverty, that wraparound care. The Department for Education is asking all local authorities with some funded support to consider what the local offer in their area is for breakfast and after-school provision to enable the families of working parents to be able to access that support. And not allow children being able to go to school earlier and stay longer, if that's a right and appropriate decision for that family, to be a barrier because they can't access that wraparound care. So we're doing a piece of work around surveying what the landscape looks like, working in partnership with our schools and thinking about being able to widen that offer, again working very closely. The local authority won't be providing that care, it will come predominantly, of course, which is right, from our primary schools, and working with our childcare providers should there be insufficient sufficiency available for that provision within our primary schools. We'll widen that out, thinking about the offer from our childcare providers, but we'll very much make those decisions in partnership with our people out there in terms of education settings and our providers. So really building on that point that Joe, you were asking around recognising some of those barriers to education, talking about making the reference to poverty and to being, are we engaging in making sure that our young children are being fed and being cared for, and in terms of in-school readiness as well. I see that as an integral part of looking at working in partnership with our partners from health as well, and the work that we're looking at within the literacy strategy, as well as a number of other strands of pieces of work. So we're addressing those barriers to education and welfare.
Thank you. Sorry, there was one other question. You asked about where we direct your questions for the regions group. If you can send those to
I was just about
Steph.
to say that as well. If you can all send that to me and I'll collate and send it as a collective.
Okay, I've just got a couple of questions for Esther, if I may indulge. Thank you for your comprehensive report and also presenting and coming here. You mentioned about funding stopping in a few days. I wondered, you know, really, I'm not asking you to do a SWOT analysis on that, but I'm just wondering what our worries are and how we are going to address if that funding doesn't continue. I mean, you know, I was the governor for 9 years at Victory Academy, and I know that they were really worried about the funding stopping, and they have sort of done partnership work and done some really good things together, which has made a difference to our children. So if that is stopping, you know, how will your good work continue? Thank you.
Thanks, Jo. We've seen the way that our work's been funded change significantly. And I think the first thing to say is that we in the Lee Institute and ourselves working with Rebecca's team, with Celia, have always found ways to make what comes next work well for schools. And I think that's, you know, part of the job of yourselves here to support in that. The specific funding I mentioned, there's twofold. One is the redesignation of Thames Gateway Teaching School Hub. We know there will be a teaching school hub in the area. We very much hope it will be ours. We're very confident in our bids and in the work we've done. We're one of the largest teaching school hubs in the country. Our work's always been praised and it's been used as case studies of excellent example across the country. So I'm not worried actually about the ongoing work of a teaching school hub. I think the bit that's more significant is the funding for national professional qualifications. So historically, Medway was, and I'm going to look at Rebecca and Celia, a priority 5 area, if I've got that right. And so for all the time I've been involved in system leadership, which is about 10 years, other than with the exception, I think, of 6 months during a transition period, we've always had these courses funded. So if you are a head teacher in Medway, you've had your MPQH funded, fully funded, at a mainstream school or an SEN school. If you're funded by the DFE, it's pretty much always been paid for you. What we are waiting for is an announcement as to, after this cohort, this February cohort, there'll be any further funding of those MPQs. This was asked again in a DFE meeting this week with teaching schools. We're still waiting for that announcement. So what we don't know is whether all schools in certain regions will still receive funding, all schools in the country will still receive funding, or whether the funding will be directed to particular areas of need or particular types of schools. What we're committed to doing is making sure that, A, these courses are always available at as low a cost as possible. And one of our foundational strategies has always been how we can bring things into Medway so that they can be delivered locally by local people at cost price, so that all we're doing is continuing to provide the service. So if the funding isn't there, I think we will see an impact, but we will look together with the head teacher associations about how we continue to access. So we will know more when it is released, and we're pressing the DFE for an answer. It may come after redesignation announcements.
Thank you. Just one more question, Esther, if I may. Obviously, you know, you get really good feedback, and I know teachers have raved about your training, and I know you're not responsible for the outcomes of the training and attainment, but is there any avenues where good practice is showcased and shared that you do as a trust? And how can we link that with improving things for our children in Medway, because they really matter?
Thank you. Great question. And the first thing I'd say is that the best places I've seen of sharing of excellent practice is to point back down to our head teacher associations and the work of Mella and Medway secondary heads in working together in zones and collectively having open door policies. And that's, you know, not the work of the Lee Institute, that's the work of individual schools. What we do as the Lee Institute is allow ways for that excellent practice to be shared wider by training people to facilitate. So as well as people coming on our programmes, we've also got really comprehensive programmes for people that are going to be delivering. So in some ways we're quite prescriptive in what we offer because this is a DFE mandate to deliver national programmes at local levels. But what we can do is talk about how can people take excellent practice from their own situations and use that as facilitators, as moderators, as mastery specialists. And in that way, we then can keep our training in schools so that when it's local head teachers, local senior leaders, and really noticed as we were talking that the two newer MPQs are early years leadership and leadership of literacy. And I think it's really interesting that nationally they've been designated as MPQs. And so in those cases, we've taken local people who are excellent in their practice, trained them as facilitators on their programmes, and in many cases they're delivering in their own schools or in other local Medway schools. So then at the same time there's that opportunity to embed that learning. I think, you know, thank you for the feedback on the Maths Hub. That is absolutely focused on mastery specialists, taking people into their schools, looking at what's happening and then modelling that practice. So yeah, we really hope it's happening all over the place. Thank you.
Thank you. Two more questions, if I may, unless there's anybody else, because, oh, sorry. Thank you, Vicky. Vicky, then Liz. I'll be quiet.
Thank you. I just wanted to come back to some of the points raised about SEND data. A lot of the measures used in this report aren't accessible to the pupils in the special schools in Medway. So as special schools, we work really hard to find robust measures of internal moderation, but also external moderation with schools in Medway and beyond, so that we can compare and be aspirational for our students and make sure that we are achieving the best outcomes for them. I wonder if a formalisation of that process, so that can be presented as as measures of progress for children with SEND, may be worth considering, so they can be better demonstrated. Also, we use a lot of case studies to flesh out the individual stories behind progress. So children over time, over their whole school career, where have they gone, why was that, what happened to them? And I wonder that as a measure more generally as well may give some more indication about why some of this drop-off happens, what happens to children at certain points in their educational career. So there's a more robust measure for their progress over time rather than quite a general picture. Obviously there's work behind that, but I think it would give a better indication of children's educational journey. I also think there are variable qualities of EHCP outcomes still. I think some of those are not always an efficient method of measuring progress because of the way that they're written and the point in a child's career that they're written. So I think having additional measures of demonstrating progress is always going to be beneficial for children with SEND.
Yeah, that sounds a good point. Thank you, Vicky. Sharon? Oh, sorry. Liz and Sharon, sorry.
Thanks, Jo. No, that fits nicely on from Vicky's point, because that's sort of what I was just going to sort of go on from my last question about just trying to formalise some data on the SEN, and thanks, Celia, for your sort of replies with regards to sort of the complexities of that and trying to sort of maybe show where needs are, where there's similar needs for children and how that's comparing with their outcomes and things. But can I just get sort of clarification on the SEN data? Am I right in thinking, are all children included in that, or are sometimes children taken out of the figures because of it not being suitable?
No, all children with the HCPs.
Yeah, so that's why I'd really love to see sort of more work on, even if it's not formal data, sort of somehow a presentation of informal data, if you like, where, you know, if a child is, you know, because I know as a parent, I had a letter to say your child will not be sitting the phonics test, you know, so therefore my child shouldn't have been in the data for the phonics test if he didn't even sit the test, you know, so if we can sort of, you know, take those children out and then produce the data again, it will show a totally different picture, won't it?
Thank you, Liz. Sharon?
Thanks, Jo. I'm not going to sit here and pretend I'm a doctor, because I'm not, obviously. But what really struck out to me is, in my other hats, I work with doctors, and they explain to me that sometimes they don't diagnose children with special needs until they're around about 8, because then you go on to the next phase. So what really struck out to me at the key stage 2 is that drop-off. There could be some SEND children that aren't diagnosed or are now starting to show. I mean, with my own children, and I've got lots of foster carers, I've got children that are that it's round about that 8 years old that then they start having difficulty in school. And looking at key stage 2 and the drop-off, I wonder how much that is what you were saying, and if that's somewhere where we need to look at, because sometimes they could be mild special needs that don't need an EHCP, but they're still going to show up in these figures. And also going back to what Jo was saying, and Rebecca with the wraparound care, if also at that roundabout age 8, when we're asking children to use their brains more than we were in early stages, that if there's any trauma at home, and that could just be, I'm not talking about massive trauma, it could just be parents struggling and arguing, then that stops them from learning. And I think coming back, I think it was Jo said after COVID, that could also have a knock-on on effect on this, because it just seems like it, like you say, early years is fine, and then we just drop off. And it was because I've got it in my head that it's 8 years that we're going to start seeing these problems arise. As soon as I saw the diagram, it just like struck me that that's spot on, really. I don't know, we need to be looking into this and putting a bit of support in there and helping these children. And then I'm sure if we help them in that stage, then they can go on and we won't be seeing children drop off.
Thank you. Smitha?
Thank you, Chair, for indulging me. I just have 2 questions. I kind of want to talk about Key Stage 5 and beyond. I want to know, what do we do to support needs? Once you identify them, what happens next? How are they kind of channeled into education? And I'm also curious about Inspire Free School having the lowest proportion of students in education or employment. I think it's one of the appendices that you've got that data. Why would that be, one particular school? It's a free school. Does that have any impact? It's, I'll tell you which page it's on. It's Appendix D of the report. It shows Key Stage 5 percentage in education or employment. And Key Stage 4 percentage in education or employment. And Inspire has 33.3%. Just, that's quite a big difference from other schools. I was just curious what happened. Thank you.
Is that okay to answer? Thank you.
Okay, so I'll answer that one first in terms of Inspire. Inspire is a special school for children with SEMH. It's a secondary special school for children with SEMH. in terms of the support key stage 5, so we do a lot of tracking of children to see where they are and whether they're in their sustained destinations or whether they go to school, and we pick up young people who are struggling in that destination. The work around aspiration, where young people are going, the kind of careers advice and guidance is the statutory duty of the schools. We do have a careers network. We do have enterprise coordinators working with all of our schools. All of our schools have a linked enterprise coordinator to work with them on that advice and guidance. We have done a post-16 review to look at where those destinations are and where our young people are going. By and large, most young people stay in their school for their sixth form, so there are some issues around that in terms of what's most appropriate for our young people and are they getting the right advice and guidance at that time. And I think if you recall when we went through that report in this committee, we put a lot in, and schools do a lot in terms of advice and guidance, but the young people were saying they weren't getting enough. So really recognising how that works together. And there is a post-16 partnership group being set up to look at that with all of our post-16 providers, including our college and wider training providers, to make sure that we have a really good offer of that next step and really promote that aspiration. In terms of the comments around the SEND data, absolutely, really good idea, Vicky, and we can pick that up outside in terms of looking at how we can disaggregate that data and maybe present it in another way. The report does have SEND support data, so a child who might not have an EHCP yet should be identified by their school as something that was what we call SENK, and it's recorded in here as SEND support. So looking at maybe the outcomes for SEND support young people, you're right, the majority of EHCPs are given around that stage in primary, so mid to the end of primary. Certainly in Medway, that's where the majority come in, because that's where the increased escalation of need shows. And all of our work that we're doing with SEND, the training for teachers, the additional inclusion funding that's going in, is to try and reduce the level of escalation for those young people, so they don't come out and then they're on a different trajectory from that point forward. It is a national picture, but absolutely we are looking at that in terms of our young people in Medway. I think that answers all the questions.
Okay, I've got just two more, sorry. Just a little bit about, obviously, supporting parents, really, because obviously, you know, they are the main educators of their children, preschool, from birth, and actually foster parents as well. You know, what are we doing to make sure that they're knowing at what stage their child is at, how they're progressing, but also how to help with home learning and, you know, make that environment sort of book-rich, knowledge-rich, question-rich, number-rich. You know, is there any... I know, unfortunately, we had all those lovely Sure Start centres, and I know they started at birth, but what are we doing as an authority for that, from foster care parents to all... I mean, Parent Forum do a fantastic job. I've seen, when I visited Abbey Court, I saw parents there doing learning as well, but sort of like it's not just... you know, in early years, it's got to be, parents have got to be invested in their children all the way through. And then the thing, I know it's not mentioned in the report, but I always get a little bit worried about home learning, only because we're recovering from a pandemic, and I do believe all of us are kind of social beings, and it's okay if you're, you know, home learning and you're making academic progress, but what about the rest of it, really? And are our youth service maybe involved with the home learners and things like that, so they have more of that, you know, personal and social development as well? And do they get support with exams and transitions and etc.? I'm stopping speaking now, thank you.
Thank you. So in terms of the support for parents, so within a school setting, a school has to report certainly the academic progress as a minimum of 3 times a year. That's the legal requirement for schools to do that. They do quite a good job in terms of the parent evenings and the coffee morning, etc. Rebecca can touch on the significant work we do with early years and the Family Information Hub. We are also launching our inclusion teams into our Start for Life hubs. So we've got the first 2 of those moving out. Hopefully by the end of this month they will be in those hubs, and we'll be doing some publications around that. And if you recall, the whole purpose of putting our inclusion teams into the Start for Life hubs was so parents have a drop-in. I've got an issue, I need to understand something, I've got a challenge at school, my child isn't coping with this. They walk in and they get help to navigate the system, because that's the biggest issue that we find at the moment. And parents are reporting, I don't actually know where to get that support from, I don't know the answers. And that might mean that we have a conversation with the school with them or on their behalf, or it might mean that we signpost them to a more appropriate service that can support that young person. In terms of home learning, so as you know, every parent has a right to make the decision to electively home educate their child, and there are certain arrangements around that. We have a duty to monitor that elective home education, so we have a conversation with the parents, we do home visits, but actually as a parent you don't have to let us in and you don't have to talk to us about it. And that will then extend, it goes on. If we aren't comfortable with what's going on in the home, we can then put a school attendance order in place. So Rebecca runs a team that has all the children who are electively home educated. There is a cohort that are rightly and appropriately electively home educated, and then there is a cohort that churn, that they come out, we find them, we put them back in. And the team visit them and support them, and usually they're also open to some of the other services that we have running in the council. In terms of exam support, if they're electively home educated, or that wider PSE support, we don't provide the exams for them. They're not registered. That's the parent's choice to take them away, and unfortunately if they're not on a school roll, they then can't be entered. So you're right, it is very sad that happens. And that's why we do spend a lot of time making sure that parents who have made that decision understand the decision, understand that they would need to find somebody to enter their children for exams and pay for it themselves, and encourage as much as possible to enter back into our education system.
Thank you.
Thanks, Celia. Can I just add something there in terms of supporting those Year 11 students coming up to their GCSEs? We're going into, I think, the 3rd year of a successful project with Mid-Kent College for children who are electively educated at home. And we've targeted a number of those young people with an offer from Mid-Kent College that should they wish to engage in a remote learning programme with some face-to-face sessions, and gradually, you won't be surprised to hear me say that those face-to-face sessions increase in their frequency gradually and over time. And actually what we've seen is that the uptake on that is increasing. It's not enough, but it's increasing, and so we're continuing that work that's been very successful. I just want to come back to the close partnership that we have with Medway Parents Carers Forum as well. Ongoing information exchange with them really informs our thinking, really informs our communication with schools, and the work that our officers do. That's ongoing, but it's a real strength. And the final point I wanted to add about the you made reference there, Joe, about the children's centres, and my mind's very much turned to the Start for Life work and the programmes that are emerging there, and the early talk programmes, the various different speaking and listening targeted programmes. Forgive me, I can't remember what they're called off the top of my head, but that's all part of, again, the literacy strategy, where we're looking at what are the needs of our young people and working with our early years parents to engage them in that work is a really pivotal part of making sure parents have support to be able to support their children at home in those early talking, reading and writing skills. So that's ongoing and very much on the agenda.
Thank you. Right, we're out of time. Oh.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to comment on this report this evening, because I think that, first of all, I want to thank our schools. I think that the relationship with our schools is positive. I think the relationship with schools and the local authority has improved, and sadly that was off the back of COVID, but it has, and I'm very grateful for that. Whether you sit in early years schools, whether you're a parent, a carer, whether you're in FE or the universities, I think that the local authorities' relationship with some of those institutions has improved, and I'm satisfied that the local authority is playing its role within resources. So that's an important point to make. You know, the aim is to strengthen Medway's educational community. And Esther this evening gave some really good examples and illustrations of how that's happening. The local authority has many responsibilities, and it's usually the buck will stop with us when things are not necessarily going as they should, and we understand that. We're prepared for that. We get support from members and other interested parties. However, the achievement and attainment of Medway's children and young people sits with the schools. It is absolutely crystal clear. And that's what we need to consider as we're moving forward. And I have thought for a long time that the leadership and governance needs to be strengthened in Medway. And I was really, really pleased when people were putting their hands up around, yes, I am a governor, because we need to hold schools to account. And you have this evening very detailed data and information, but I'm wondering at the level of those conversations when you're sitting in the school in your governor's meetings, because without that holding to account through governance and leadership, we are seeing a decline. The facts and figures this evening, we are seeing a decline, and that has to be arrested, and it's got to be arrested quickly, because those children are in school now and they get one chance. So as the Director of Children's Services, Celia and the other ADs absolutely understand the journey that we're on, and it's an ongoing journey. So just some rounding off this evening, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Leanne. So, Vice Chair, I don't know if you've added, but it might be really good to add that, you know, to encourage members to become governors if they're not already, and to, if they are governors, to harness what Rebecca said about the governor training partnership. I think that might be a kind of nice thing to do. To consider writing to the school's regionals officer to do that via Stephanie, and to take on Vicky's great idea of developing like a reckon of achievement or data for SEND children that shows progress. And
okay, well, I move that the committee notes the report and the disappointment at the unwillingness of the Regional Schools Director to attend or send a representative, requests the data looking at the progress throughout the school journey, along with the data for SEND children being taken out if they don't fit the metrics going forward, and then the other bits that Joe added. That was everything across the board. I think I caught everything.
Okay, anything else? Is that seconded then? Okay, thanks, Smither. And can I say thank you, Esther, thank you, Rebecca, and thank you, Celia. It really was great information which enabled us to be deep diving into what we needed to know and find out. So much appreciated. Okay, item 6, Cookham Wood. So can I welcome Cassandra Chapman, who is the Deputy Governor at Cookham Wood.
Joe, we haven't agreed, we've just seconded.
Thank you. Sorry. I'm trying to keep to time, sorry. Can we agree? Thank you all. Thank you, Paula. Who we've been trying to get here for ages. We were expecting the Governor. We're glad you sent us the report, but it did impede us having it at the last minute because many of us on both sides of our committee work, so it's really difficult to read things, but it's lovely to see you here, so over to you.
Apologies and thank you for the invite to attend this evening. Cookham Wood is a young offender facility in Medway, Kent. The current operational capacity is 90 boys between the ages of 15 and 18, and currently we have 79 boys on roll with us, both remand and sentenced young people. In April 2023, prior to my appointment at Cookham Wood, there was an inspection, Her Majesty's prison inspection, that placed Cookham Wood into urgent notification, and it was informed that there will need to be urgent, concerted, long-term commitment from leaders at the YOI and from the Youth Custody Service to improve standards at Cookham Wood and make it an acceptable establishment to hold children. The priority concerns and areas for improvement were noted as follows. Despite well-resourced and national leadership teams, oversight of safety, living conditions and purposeful activity was poor. Staff did not have confidence in the leadership team and their morale was very low. Evidence of the acceptance of low standards was widespread. Many staff were not wearing the right uniform, living units were dirty, important equipment was broken and graffiti remained a problem. There was a complete breakdown of behaviour management. This had led to an escalation in poor behaviour to the point where there was widespread weapon making and nearly a quarter of children reporting that they felt unsafe. Staff told the inspectors that they were reluctant to search thoroughly or challenge threatening or intimidating behaviour because they were not always supported by colleagues or managers. Solitary confinement of children had become normalised at the establishment. Over a quarter of the population was completely separated from the main population. Most were locked in their cells for 23.5 hours a day with no meaningful human interaction. Children were unable to access sufficient education. The range of education on offer was also insufficient and children had too few learning tasks to complete in their cells. When children could attend, the quality of education was inadequate. There were not enough teachers or prison officers to establish leaders, to enable leaders to deliver the vocational curriculum. Managers did not allocate children to vocational subjects based on their needs or aspirations. Instead, children were allocated on the basis of which children could mix together. As a result, too many children were disengaged and lacked motivation to participate meaningfully in learning. The current governor, who sends his apologies this evening, was appointed approximately 6 weeks prior to the inspection, and then I was appointed in July of last year. Since the inspection, the main focus of the site has been to respond to the UN Action Plan and take the establishment back to basics in order to make progress and move forwards. The senior leadership team has been strengthened, with some previous members moving on to new roles and new leaders being brought in from HMP Belmarsh, HMP Rochester and HMP Swaleside. This has brought fresh thinking and new ways of working to Cookham Wood, and positive progress is beginning to be made. Focus has been placed onto addressing staff about wearing correct uniform, including epaulets. Cleanliness is an ongoing focus across the site. Major refurbishment is taking place, along with fire safety works. Searching has been a big focus for the staffing team, ensuring that they feel able to search boys thoroughly and feel supported and confident to challenge as appropriate. A dedicated manager was introduced to have oversight of separated boys, and significant work has been completed regarding time out of room. There has been an appointment of a new head of education who is working very closely with the site to ensure that the boys who are currently separated for various reasons maintain access to the curriculum and have meaningful interactions with staff. The education timetable has been updated, and there has also been work to establish better quality education delivery with more challenging work for boys to complete. A new governance model has been developed. And then just some brief data as well. With regards to assaults, overall there's a downward trajectory in assaults from the time of the inspection. We're currently looking to trial a new way of investigating violence. This is a method used in the adult estate and will enable us to look at what has led to certain incidents and formulate plans to resolve. Self-harm remains at a reasonably low rate and one of the lowest across the youth estate, with few incidents each month and generally 1 or 2 young people being responsible for these incidents. The main method of self-harm is cutting. Work continues across site to ensure that the ACT process is to a good standard and that actions are supportive to young people. The main driver to self-harm currently is being nude to custody. There has been a recent review of our early days in custody process, and work is ongoing to improve this. Separation. Rates are lower than they were in May 2023 when the inspection highlighted an area of concern. Individual case managers are now allocated to each individual boy, and there is a better oversight over risk posed. The new governance structure has meant the reintroduction of a separation management and review group meeting, which enables a better understanding of what leads to separation and how we manage it. Release on temporary licence continues to be a good story for Cookham Wood, with high numbers of eligible boys accessing time in the community for reasons such as education, employment or maintaining family ties. The number of episodes and boys accessing Rottle exceed all of the other YOI sites. Staffing and resource. Staff resignation rates have risen slightly over the year. However, we have a better understanding of the reasons behind this and we're actively working on it. Sickness rates have decreased over recent months with a better understanding of the drivers to sickness across the site. The ongoing work currently, the establishment are now expecting a further HMRP inspection, which we're continuing to work towards. There remains significant work to do, however, we are content that we are moving in the right direction.
Thank you, Cassandra. Officers, have we got anything to add before we discuss this item? Okay, I open up for questions. Smither, Liz, Leah. We'll do it in 3. You all down, though. Sorry, can we start that again? Obviously, Tessa's new to the committee and it's her first time. So let's take questions one at a time. So if we start with Smither, then we've got Leah, Liz, George. Anybody else? Sorry, Adrian, thank you. Oh, thank you, Satinder. Smither.
Hi, thank you. Thank you, Joe, and thank you, Cassandra, for the report. I have to say, based on Joe's already raised the fact that it was difficult for me to, I think, find time to read this and do justice to it, given I only got it yesterday evening. And now that the report's here and I've read it, I do find it quite lacking in detail. I feel like all the failings have been identified, and we have some high-level statements that there are new roles in place and structure, governance and structure differences, changes have been implemented. But there are lots of things I wonder when I read that, but what actually is happening? What does it look like, the improvements you're making? What measures? So one of the things you mentioned, main driver to self-harm, for example. I know you're saying it's a reduction, but it's still quite horrifying that there's a few cases every month. And if you've got measures in place, what does that look like? I just feel like it lacks a little bit of detail. Specifically, I do want to know what's happening to support young people who are new to the institution. How does that process look like, and what improvements are you going to make? And what are you doing to support the well-being of your staff? I know you've got retention and recruitment issues, but given the working conditions, I can only imagine the stress under which they're functioning. And what are you doing for their well-being? Yes, thank you.
Thank you, and apologies. I've never attended a meeting such as this, so I wasn't sure what to expect in terms of the level of information that people require, so I apologise for that. I take the point with regards to self-harm and, you know, the concern about the number of boys that come through that do self-harm. Having worked in prison establishments for 20 years, these are very, very, very low levels. A lot of the adult estates, you would see significantly higher levels than you see here. You just asked the question about early days. We had some of our youth custody services colleagues come in a couple of weeks ago and complete what we would call a bus to bed journey. So what it would feel like for a young person to literally step out of the transport when they arrive, right through the first couple of weeks within custody. So there are some ideas from them about how we can improve those processes and what that looks like. There is an induction process for the first 2 weeks of a boy coming to custody. That would involve meeting with the staff, understanding how the site runs, what their regime looks like. They meet with health professionals, they look at their physical health, mental health. They have a full education assessment, and then there's a process whereby they are allocated to a relevant pathway in education, for example. But there are some areas for improvement for us there, particularly highlighted that, you know, a number of our boys that come in have learning difficulties, mental health difficulties, etc. And probably just the first few days just needs to be allowing them to acclimatise to their surroundings, really. And then the question about staff support and well-being, again, that was noted that, you know, there were some areas for improvement. With regards to that, we have set up a staff council, whereby now there is some consultation with the staff about how we can improve the site, how they can feel safer and supported. We have a number of agencies available to us for referral, for physical health, mental health, 24-hour phone lines for our staff to access, for example. There is now a reward and recognition scheme for the staff, and a lower level sort of daily shout-outs for staff to highlight good areas of work, but we're continuing to build on that currently.
Thank you. Leah?
Apologies, my laptop's logged me out whilst I was listening, so notes. So I think mostly a lot of my questions were around the I don't know if it's called separation or segregation, it was kind of referred to separately. But it was about how long are boys generally separated for, because there's a thing about how often it happens. But I think to me, the main primary function of a young offenders institute is then to stop those children from ending up in the adult estate. And I wonder how conducive lots and lots of time in like segregation is to that. And then I also looked at the leadership and saw that almost all of the leadership have all come to you guys from having worked in the adult estate. And then you say, well, the levels of self-harm are much lower here than they are in the adult estate. I wondered if you'd looked at maybe recruiting leadership that had youth services background or a school services background, so they have more understanding of working with teenagers. And then the last bit was in the report, I didn't see anything about the reoffending rates. So again, about that kind of trying to stop these children eventually ending up in the adult estate. I don't know if you have that data, but that'd be great.
Thank you. So, yeah, separation. At the time of the inspection, I understand there were approximately 78, 79 boys on roll, and there were around 20 boys separated, which meant that they did not mix with any of the other boys on the site, and had very limited time out of room, as was reported, some of them only having half an hour time out of room. Some of those boys were separated for quite significant numbers of days, and if we get to the 21-day point of a boy being separated, then we have to submit paperwork to our YCS colleagues for approval to keep those boys separated for a longer period of time. Unfortunately, some of the drivers to separation are levels of violence, and to shorten those periods of separation without addressing those levels of risk obviously results in further violence. So we have done a significant amount of work to understand our separation and what that looks like. We have a pathway now that some of the more challenging boys that we have, there are additional areas on site, so maybe rather than going to education where they can't focus, they can't concentrate, and they can't mix, they are going to do other activities. And we've got a very good psychology team, very good health and wellbeing team, etc. Art therapists, family therapists that will come in and do work with those boys. And we've looked at some data today that has shown, certainly during December, our levels of separation are much lower. And I'm pleased to report today that we've only got, there are 8 boys separated as opposed to the 20 that we have. And some of them are for much shorter periods. Some of those are, for a 72-hour period to hold, to gather information, to understand, and then look to see how we can move forward with those. The query about pulling a number of our leadership team in from the adult estate. I myself came for the adult estate, but previously had 15 years experience in the youth estate prior to that. In terms of YOIs in the country, there are only 3 others. Feltham, so in sort of outer London, 1 in Stoke, and then 1 in Wetherby, which is much further north. So to try and pull a leadership team in that require a certain level of qualification within the prison service is very difficult. But the senior leaders that have come in all have probably 15, 20 years experience, and working in an adult estate for a period of time. A lot of the issues that the boys face and that we see in the adult estate are very, very similar, and a lot of the adults function at a much, much lower level. So I think I'm really quite content with the leadership team that we've got here. And then you asked about reducing or reoffending rates. Unfortunately, a very high number of the boys that we have into Cookham Wood now are on incredibly lengthy sentences. We're talking 15, 20 years plus, and they will transition to the adult estate. So reoffending rates are difficult for us to judge. We do have shorter sentences, but when I went into the youth estate 20 years ago, you would very much get boys in who would serve 2 months for theft of a mobile phone or theft of a car. We're now seeing, much more serious violent offences in the cohort of boys that we have coming through.
Thank you. Celia next, and then Liz.
Thank you. I just wanted to add on to that in terms of the leadership. So we have been working with the new leadership, particularly around that point of view of young people. So they've visited our outstanding Prue, they visited an SEMH special school in Kent, really to look at the curriculum, the environment and how things are set up. And we have offered our inclusion and mental health training that we are doing for our schools. We've made that offer to Cookham staff as well.
Thank you, Celia. Liz?
Thanks, Jo. And yeah, thanks very much for this report and for being here with us this evening. Yeah, I mean, I must admit that the report was quite alarming to read. The priority concerns in there were very widespread, from cleanliness to education to the safety behaviour. So it feels that it's right across the board, all those issues. So I'm pleased to hear that you feel you're moving in a better direction. I mean, for me, sort of one of the issues is safety. I think it has to be a priority. Unless the boys and staff are safe, you can't really. It sort of needs to be a foundation. And I'm just sort of concerned about sort of reading where staff are sort of unable to search the boys properly and not feeling supported when doing so. So not only are they having a challenging situation at the time, but then they go on to sounds like they go on to then be challenged by their line managers. So that just sort of really is an unhealthy environment. But I just wondered if I can sort of, what the factors are in that. I noticed in the report there's no sort of details of the demographics of staff. And I'm just wondering if, is there quite a balance of gender of staff? Do you think that is one of the reasons with the searching of boys? I mean, I can imagine it's very difficult for a female member of staff to be carrying that out. And do you think that is a concern that if, because I don't know what the demographics are. It might be that you actually have more men than women, and that's not the issue. But that came to my mind, that thinking that's something that, if you've got a 17-year-old boy and who's being asked to be searched by a woman, that's going to cause all sorts of issues. So I just wonder if you could give us some more detail on that, please. Thank you.
I think that the demographic of our staffing in terms of the gender split is fairly even. One of the concerns that I have, I think, about our staffing is the age of a number of our staff. We have an incredibly young staffing group, some of which are, only a couple of years older than the boys themselves, which can be very difficult. I think at the time of the inspection and shortly after, a number of the boys carried weapons, which was a concern. So there was a reset day prior to my start in, I think it was the end of May, beginning of June last year, where dedicated searching teams from across the prison estate came in to assist the team to find and remove a number of those weapons. They do still continue to be an issue, which is why we are really pushing the searching and ensuring that every boy is searched out of their rooms from different areas. So when they move from the house block to education, for example. But the boys that we have, a lot of them are very entrenched in gang culture, and carrying weapons and acts of violence are a matter of course for them. So a lot of this is about education and is a long-term issue for us.
Thank you. George?
Yeah, thank you, Jo. And thank you, Deputy Governor, for coming. I mean, I'm going to touch on a couple of things, but I think, first of all, I just want to say this is just appalling. I mean, this is not acceptable in any, and I just have to say this, it's not acceptable in any way, shape or form. And I appreciate you weren't in office, but obviously you're representing the senior management team and the Governor who's in command of this prison, this Young Defenders Institution. I mean, I received the report back in just after May, actually just after we had our local elections, a copy of this. And I mean, it is just shocking. Every single page is just totally unacceptable. And I appreciate the challenges that have been outlined, but I don't really have confidence, certainly in the report that's been provided to this committee, that all of these concerns are being detailed. I mean, the report goes on. There's all sorts of issues with staffing, which I'm particularly interested in, obviously, because of the fact that the LADO Services sits in with the responsibility of this council. You've got staff not wearing the right uniforms, not displaying epaulets. I mean, you've got here, the other night pulled back out the Ofsted report, both the Ofsted report that's contained within this unannounced inspection report from the Chief Inspector of Young and Defendants Prisons, and some of the some of the stuff going on in here, the fact that there's no and the pictures. I mean, I would urge colleagues on the committee, because this wasn't included with the papers, to actually go and have a read of the report. I know myself and Joe actually were talking about this the other day. The pictures in the report are it's just shocking, and I just don't get the confidence that from the report that's been provided to this committee that things are changing at a pace. And I noted Celia's comments there about the educational side of it, obviously inadequate in every single area on the area that was sort of reviewed by Ofsted. And the alarming bit within that in particular, within the Ofsted element, talking about the education quality, is that it talks about the fact that actually it's been getting worse since 2021, and they've not, the confidence in the leadership team has got worse because they haven't actually even been listening to what Ofsted said in their previous inspections. So it's all very disappointing. I think, for me, though, I'm just particularly interested in the turnaround process and sort of what yourself and the Governor are targeting in terms of this turnaround, and how quickly, both within the next inspection, but particularly focusing on the education elements, which it makes clear have been getting worse even after you've had previous inspections detailing that have been inadequate and requires improvement, and still not improving in those subsequent inspections. I'd just like to know how quickly we can start to see some of those judgments within the Ofsted elements move. And just what is going on in terms of the wider focus, both from the Ministry of Justice and also the wider, your colleagues within His Majesty's Prison Service, in terms of what support's being provided externally for this prison. Because obviously within the report it talks about some of the resourcing of the prison service, and it talks about how actually in some cases resource is being misused, it's being mismanaged, there should be a personal service being offered. And I'm just wondering, is there an improvement plan that sits behind this? Why wasn't a copy brought to this committee? Is there how is this being overseen? Have you got an internal governance group? Because, as I say, some of the statistics within the report that you've provided to this committee don't give those answers. So at the moment, I've got to say, I'm not particularly, I haven't really got confidence from this report that things are turning around at a pace that would be acceptable to bring the youth offending institution back in line with sort of standards before we even start to look at getting back to a good or outstanding level. So I'd appreciate your thoughts on some of those things, please.
Thank you. So yes, there is a urgent notification action plan that we are currently working towards, and as I've already stated, I didn't know what was expected for this evening, so I can only apologise for that. And we have external colleagues from the YCS who regularly come in and hold us to account. There is also the Independent Monitoring Board, who are a group of people who come into the establishment and hold us to account through that. You've mentioned the LADO services that we work very closely with. Timeframes, like we are expecting the inspectors to attend again very, very shortly. I would expect within a matter of months we would have inspectors there. And I would like to think that there will be progress. Unfortunately, I think some of the things that have happened at Cookham Wood have clearly have not happened overnight. These have been happening for a number of years, and trying to unpick some of those things and completely get them back to basics, as you suggest, before we can truly move forward is is where we're at. You know, you picked up on the uniform and epaulets. That is a daily discussion with the staffing group. And again, you know, we are starting to see some improvements with regards to that. It is slow. It's certainly not as quick as we would like it to be. But this is a big culture shift for us. And I think the amount of time it's taken Cookham to get to the point that it is, it will take a significant time to move us in the right direction.
Thank you. Before I go to Adrian, can I go to Leanne, please?
I just want to back up what you're saying. I sit on the UN Strategic Board. I put a lot of time into this because I don't think anyone can underestimate what Cookham is like. However, there is a lot of good work going on, but it's going to take time. This started from a really low base, and I think Medway Council itself has had a journey recently from a very low base. So it's not going to turn around overnight, but certainly everyone, the Youth Justice Board, the Governor, there is a real desire, a real push. Our LADO is working really, really well with Cookham. I think it's a good relationship there. There's high support, high challenge. You must remember that this is a secure estate, so some of the information that you might expect you won't get. However, my assurance this evening is that Medway Council is well represented in this particular improvement journey.
Thank you, Leanne. Adrian, it's your turn.
Thank you, and thank you, Cassandra, for coming to speak with us this evening. I did have an early insight into this, in that it was about March or April last year, while out electioneering in my ward, I came across a member of staff who was extremely upset and wanted to talk to me, so I went in and we talked for quite a long time. And a lot of what's in this report reflects what that person told me. Unfortunately, the person was absolutely adamant that they did not want their name to get into the public domain. So it was very difficult to take this forward. And I was still thinking about how I could take it forward when news of the inspection broke. But there was an issue that this person spoke about. There was a real issue there that is not been mentioned at all in the report, or indeed this evening, was there's a huge drug problem. Huge. In fact, the accusation was almost made that the staff were allowing the drugs to circulate because that kept the children quieter. While they were drugged up to the eyeballs, they were easier to control, was virtually what was said. So I would like some assurance what you're doing to try and counteract that drug culture. And also, given how vehement that person was, that they didn't want their name, what have you done to improve a speak out policy so staff members can feel that they can come forward and talk about these concerns? Because that's what really surprised me, that that person was so adamant that they shouldn't mention their name or anything, which made it very difficult to deal with an issue, because you can't report something when when it's entirely anonymous. And what made it more difficult for me to understand at the time was, having visited Cookham Wood on 2 occasions previously, 4 or 5 years prior to that, because Medway Council had its youth offending team partly embedded into the secure estate there, and members had a couple of visits. Now I remember having a very, very long and extensive tour round the premises. I saw no graffiti. It was clean. probably smelling more of disinfectant than anything else, but it at least had, and I can't remember any of the staff that we came across quite a few, that looked scruffy. So something went badly wrong over quite a short space of time for it to degenerate so quickly, and that's very worrying. So I'd like to, from this, I would like at least some indication of what you're doing to counteract the drugs issue, and how are you making sure that your staff in the future feel that they can speak out. You know, what is your speak out or whistleblowing policy, please?
Can I just ask first, was this an officer that raised the concern with you?
Yes, and had worked there for a number of years.
Thank you. In terms of a query about drug problems, I would not suggest that it is a significant problem at Cookham Wood. It may well have been in the past, but currently, you know, there are some reports of cannabis use, but those are generally the only reports that we get, and you know that is, when you look at the rest of the prison estate, is very few and far between. Certainly is not the biggest issue that we have at all. With regards to staff raising any concerns prior to my appointment, there wasn't really a structure which we call the BILAT structure, whereby staff members would have one-to-one meetings with their line manager. Those meetings very rarely took place. That structure is now in, and we have a really good proportion of our staff regularly having those meetings, so they are able to air those concerns with their line managers. There is a whistleblowing policy that they can follow if they want to. As I said, we have a number of agencies that people can go to access support and raise concerns. Our prison group director and the executive director visit every third week currently, and they go around and speak to staff and encourage like a real open door policy, as do myself and the governor. There is also like an intelligence system within the prison, that if people wanted to raise, you know, or notify us of specific concerns, they can do so, you know, without their name getting out to the wider staffing group, for example. And I think where you kind of raised a concern about having visited 4 or 5 years ago, it was clean, there was no graffiti, all of that. I can't comment, I didn't work at Cookham at that point. But the reports that I've had from the staff that have been there for lengthy periods is that COVID was a significant concern. So prior to that, you will probably recall the main house block is split into 2, A side and B side, and overall each side can hold up to 90 boys. So, you know, the full capacity is 180. We're at a reduced capacity currently. On either side, all of the boys were mixing, so you would have had 90 boys mixing. When COVID came in, you will all recall that, you know, people had to stay at home and they couldn't mix outside the groups. And what happened at Cookham, I understand, is the boys were put into groups of 4 maximum, and they were then their like family groups, as we would have experienced in our homes. And that caused a real divide and uncertainty, and I think that is where a lot of our issues have come from in terms of mixing violence and then trying to increase that again.
Thank you. Satinder, then Paula.
Yeah, I don't really have that much to add. A lot of it's been covered. I did raise this earlier on when I first started as a councillor after the newspaper report. And I understand, is it the Secure State Safeguarding Assurance Group that covered the safeguarding or scrutinise the safeguarding? Is that correct? From the council's perspective, I'm just trying to see where we fit in with this. Do we have any oversight into the scrutiny within the safeguarding group? we as councillors here.
Donna, please.
So we've got Leanne sits on the UN board, which is strategically overseeing all of that improvement that's happening across the estate there. And then on top of that, we've got all of the other structures like the Safeguarding Children Partnership that has some line of sight to it. And then we've got our Adolescent Service and some officers that are also linked in to Cookham Wood as well, that are part of children's social care with us, that's sitting with us. So we've got quite a lot of different routes in and connections with Cookham Wood and keeping oversight. And we've been involved for some time around, you know, trying to oversee that and help support the improvement journey in there.
Yeah, and then I suspect, just as councillors, I felt like our hands are a little bit tied in that sense. We're just, this is probably the only one we're gonna get, and then, or do we get like updates and stuff like that?
So you've got this scrutiny group really. The lead member has a role in some oversight as well. But this is your only sort of scrutiny route in, I think, as a council-wide.
Yeah. Okay, that's it.
Thank you, Sat. Paula?
Yeah, I think we've made our views pretty clear about how appalled we are at the reports, the inspection outcomes, so I'm not going to reiterate that. However, I do want to make a number of requests, which I hope the committee will agree with. I would like to request that Cookham Wood's governor or deputy governor attends our scrutiny committee every 6 months, provides a comprehensive and detailed report on progress against the Urgent Notification Action Plan. And I would also suggest that at least the lead member of the committee, if not other members of our committee, have an opportunity to visit Cookham Wood in the interim period each quarter to assess the situation on the ground and the progress that is being made to ensure that young people in custody are safe, are receiving an education, and are having an opportunity to leave custody with an opportunity to actually contribute positively to society. So those are the recommendations that I'd like the committee to consider.
Okay, thank you for that. I think that a lot of those recommendations I agree, but just looking at the work programme and looking at the efforts that Stephanie took to get anybody here, I think that possibly, and Leanne has suggested, that we receive maybe twice yearly or quarterly briefing papers. Are you happy with that?
I would like to see the governor or the deputy governor here at least once a year.
Once a year, yeah. Is everybody agreed with that? Okay. Could I just quickly ask about gangs, really? You know, obviously I'm from South East London, I've got a lot of knowledge about gangs, and actually, usually it's when people don't have a sense of belonging or a family, and then they turn to a gang as a community. So just wanted to ask, I know you've got a high staff turnover, but are you trauma-informed trained? Do you know, what the signs are? What are your policies on bullying? And how do you try to stop those powerful gang affiliations behind the doors, really?
Thank you. Yes, the staff are trauma-informed, trained, and part of the weekly regime of the staff is attendance at 2 different meetings, a core support meeting for each different area across the site, and group reflective practice. So the core support meetings enable the staff to talk about individuals what the issues are from them, what their background is maybe. Do they have family? Have they accessed education? Do they have special needs? What their offence is? Are there any other things that we need to take into account in order to work with them as an individual? The do's and don'ts, for example, of working with those. That's the core support meetings, and then the group reflective practice meetings are time for the staff, and probably answers one of the earlier questions, which didn't come to me at the time, sorry, when we asked about staff support. Enables them to share their thoughts and ideas and how they're feeling about different situations, and then they support each other through that with the support of our psychology and health and wellbeing colleagues. And then, as I've said, we have a number of interventions in terms of family therapy, art therapy, etc., that the boys are able to access as well. Sorry, I don't know if I fully answered your question there or not.
Just about how do you, behind the doors, the cells, if you like, break those gang affiliations or try to stop that allegiance, really?
So we, as some people may be aware, that those are incredibly difficult. The pressure that some young people are under to become part of gangs, what they have to do as part of a gang initiation, they are very, very, or can be very traumatic. The staff spend a lot of time trying to build relationships with boys, trying to break down some of the issues that they might have, for example, with people in authority. They probably never had a good relationship with the police, for example, and then they come into custody and receive, a prison officer in the same kind of format. So the staff spend time with them on a daily basis trying to get to know them and build that level of trust. We also have what's known as a conflict resolution team, who are a specially trained team of practitioners. If there are some kind of deep-rooted issues between, two boys that may be from opposing gangs, for example, they are specially trained to understand what's led to that, what's behind that, and then bring those boys together to break those barriers down. And we have seen some very successful examples of that working, and that work continues. Currently, we do have a high number of groups across the site that cannot mix, but we have weekly oversight of that with the staff building the relationships and the conflict resolution team, looking at our security teams, linking in with the police, etc., to break those groups down. And very recently, we had an example on one of the units where we had two very clear groups, and a number of people have come together to work with those, and we have successfully made them into one much larger group who now dine out on the unit together, play football together, go to education together. It is a slow process, but there are things in place to start to address some of those.
Thank you. Unfortunately, Adrian, we need to move on. We're a bit late.
I do want to say, just very briefly, I'd like to back Paula up with the idea of if a visit could be facilitated, because I think you have to see it to really understand it, because I went away with an impression it's very much a prison. It's not an educational establishment. It is a prison. I found it claustrophobic because I lost count of the amount of iron gates that were closing behind me without went through. And I think you need to feel that to understand it. So if that could be facilitated, I think that would be good for us to have a better understanding.
Leanne, respond, please.
Thank you. I think this is a secure estate. There is no way around this. The question about how society wishes to treat its young people is probably for another evening. However, We are not the regulatory body for Cookham Wood. That sits somewhere else. So we are a scrutiny function tonight. I know I've spoken to the Governor, who has indicated to me he is happy to arrange visits from elected members, and I'll go back, or you can, and we can sort something out. I think it's totally appropriate that the Governor or Deputy Governor is called to scrutiny once a year. I also think it's appropriate that briefings can be made to the Scrutiny Committee as appropriate, but anything further than that exceeds our function.
Okay, thank you, Cassandra. Vice Chair.
I move that we note the Complaints and Compliments Annual Report 22 to 23, and that the Governor will attend scrutiny with a detailed report annually. I did also have an opportunity for committee members to visit the facility.
Okay, and have regular briefing notes.
Regular briefing notes.
Is that seconded? Thank you, Smither. Is that agreed? Thank you. Thank you, Cassandra. You're free to go now. Bye-bye. Okay, item 7. We're a little bit behind committee, but Amy, welcome. And can I say, having been on this committee since 2019, wow, I loved your report, reading it and seeing the journey that Medway have gone on with the help of Bexley and Kent, and also how ambitious you are for the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for this opportunity to come and share with you the developments that we're making as an adoption partnership. You'll notice in the report, it was written by Sarah Skinner, who's my predecessor. She was the head of Adoption Partnership South East and ended her time with us in June, and I took over in July. Previous to that, I was a service manager in Adoption Partnership South East. But I thought it would be helpful just to share with you some more recent updates in the annual report. It's obviously dated from last financial year, so I thought it would be good just to share with you where we're at now, and given that some significant things have taken place, such as an Ofsted inspection, I thought it would be helpful to really use that as a starting place. So if we could go on to slide 3, please. The Ofsted, obviously, inspection for Medway was absolutely fantastic, and it was a real privilege to be part of that. And we've definitely observed, as colleagues of Medway, social workers and the managers within the children's services, the significant improvements that they've put in place. Even the short time that we've been involved as an adoption service since November 20. And obviously, as part of that ILAC inspection, they did look at our adoption services that we provide for Medway children. And you can see there on the screen, but I'll read it out, is that Ofsted's findings were that since the local authority has joined the Regional Adoption Agency, there have been improvements in the timeliness of identifying suitable adopters for Medway children. There is a strong and robust approach to adoption in Medway. Prospective adopters are suitably assessed and prepared for the parenting roles they are about to embark on. The partnership is appropriately prioritising the recruitment of adopters to meet the needs of Medway children. Children do not wait long to be matched, and once placed, they achieve permanence. And what I want to say now is this is just not because of what we're doing within the Regional Adoption Agency. This is an absolute joint effort with Medway Children's Services and the amazing work that the children's social workers do. So just how are we achieving that? What are we doing that Ofsted found so pleasing? So 29% of Medway children that were placed since we were live in November 2020 were placed within one of our early permanence placements. Early permanence is where we're able to duly approve our adopters to be foster carers. So what it does, especially for those very young children who may sadly have to come into care straight from birth, is they're able to be placed with their potentially permanent carers. So then when the court decides that adoption is the plan, the child doesn't then have to move to adopters. And some of those carers are absolutely amazing that they're able to take on that uncertainty that the care plan may not be adoption, care for that child, and then if the court decide, yes, adoption is the right plan, they go on to adopt that child. So we're really proud of the fact that we can place Medway children, the most vulnerable babies that are born, that it wouldn't be safe for them to return home, in this type of placement. Collaboration, as I've said, with Medway's children's teams. We've really noticed, and I know Ofsted noticed it too, the significant improvement in permanency planning. Medway have a really robust way of being able to track and monitor children's adoption care plans. And we have permanency planning leads that are specialists in adoption work that attend those meetings to be able to provide that advice and guidance around adoption care planning. And the panels that the service managers within Medway run really scrutinise that work. And they also challenge us. So when we're family finding for children that have adoption plans, they're making sure that we're doing it in a timely way, and we challenge them back. So I think it's a very healthy way that we collaborate together. So just really looking at the timeliness, and again, it's worth noting the fact that we went live as an RAA in November 20. Really in the midst of the pandemic and the impact that the pandemic has had. And you'll see in the annual report the impact that it's had on children's care proceedings and how extensive those timescales are, which is a huge frustration for all three of our partners. So it's not just a Medway issue, it's a Kent issue and it's a Bexley issue. And it's incredibly worrying how long children have had to wait for decisions to be made by the court. So therefore, when we do have placement orders granted allowing us to identify adopters, it's really important that we get a move on and we find those right adopters for those children. And you'll see there the data I've just highlighted here is to show the significant improvement. Now, this data is children that have been adopted in the financial year. So obviously, the data that you'll see where things were still quite high in 21-22, a lot of those children they were placed for adoption before we went live as an RAA. So you'll see that the timescales continue to come down. And then if you have a look in the annual report, we've got some data there that shows those children that actually had a placement order granted since we were live as an RAA and how significant the timescales have been reduced. And just finally, so we're ensuring that we're recruiting a high number of adopters. Our target this year, we're looking to around 70 to 80 adopters that will be approved that are available for your Medway children. We currently have around 17 adopters approved and waiting that be considered for Medway children that need adopters. We have a multidisciplinary adoption support team that's outlined in our report, and so therefore Medway families who have adopted have access to therapeutic intervention should they need it. And we also have commissioned, and Medway are part of that, so we have a commissioned specialist service which really takes specialist expertise. Bernardo's provide for us for birth parents, staying in touch, post-adoption order, and for people that want to access their adoption records. We have an amazing participation and engagement events for children and their parents. We have twice-year parties, fortnightly Medway preschool group that runs for our families with preschool children. We have a parent reference group, and that's for our adoptive parents who meet on a regular basis and provide real challenge to us as an agency, which is really healthy. And we're just developing a young persons reference group, which we're really excited about. And we provide training and workshops to Medway children's social workers to really help them to develop their understanding of adoption. So that is sort of an up-to-date, and it's lovely to see you, Councillor Campbell. Thank you for sitting on one of our panels. So I'm open to any questions.
We'll do one at a time, Amy, if that's okay.
Thank you. I just loved reading the report. It's so complete. You know, you read it, you get such a good picture, such a good balance between data, but also real voices. And yes, I'm absolutely honored and privileged to be on the panel. So The early permanence and increase in recruitment of prospective adopters, your increase in inquiries coming through, and mentors, increase in number of mentors. I think that's definitely very encouraging. I wondered if you think becoming the regional adoption partnership, do you think that's actually had a direct impact on your efficiencies and how you've delivered and the impact? That's my first question. There's quite a disparity between the target and the for the wait times between stages and what we are actually achieving and the national average. So who sets the targets? And are they a bit arbitrary? Are they realistic? Is what I wanted to find out. And there's a small section about the nature of about the contract for out-of-country adoption. So who's that with? How does that work, and how many cases are we looking at?
Okay.
Thank you.
So in response to your first question, absolutely Medway, and Leanne, you may want to answer this, whether Medway benefits from being part of an RAA.
That's easy, yes.
So I think being able to, because we are so large, it means that we can recruit a large number of adopters, that Medway children have a wider choice of adopters. So yeah, the scale actually means we can provide a really good service for Medway children when it comes to adoption. The targets, is it the targets around assessment or children's timescales? So that's for the adopter assessments. Yes, that's a really interesting question, because actually when you look at the national average, you'll see that we are actually doing better than the national average. So stage 1 is a 2-month part of our assessment process, and it's meant to be adopter-led, and it's the part of the assessment where we gain the DBS checks, the medicals, and it's a very much self-learning time for our applicants. With COVID, with GP surgeries and the delays there have had a massive impact nationally on adult health assessments being completed, and that has really caused a delay nationally. It's an interesting one. It's set by the DFE. The targets are there. We do our best, and we're striving to keep the stage 1 process down as much as we can. However, we follow adoption regulations. We are not going to take risks. We will ensure we've got everything we need before we progress our applicants further on. So it's a difficulty, and I know that when Donna and Leanne sit on our executive governance board, there is challenge to make sure we're doing everything we can to reduce timescales, but I won't ever do that to the detriment of actually ensuring that we're making safe approvals. And then, sorry, your final question. Yes, so that's a real, takes a lot of expertise, and in the same way that Medway benefit from being part of a larger adoption agency, because the amount of inter-country adoptions that take place are a lot less, it would cost us more money to recruit specialist social workers to do that, and also the type of legal advice. So there's an inter-country adoption, and a lot of regional adoption agencies commission that service. It's recently been taken over by Cookham, and they specialise in inter-country adoption. The different legal complexities around where a child is from and being adopted are huge, and the type of expertise social workers need. So it is felt it's best met by a specialist agency such as the interagency adoption, which is run by Cookham.
Thank you. Anybody else? Liz.
Thank you, and thanks very much for this report. I agree with Smitha. It's really positive read, and there's lots of great stuff going on. I just wanted to ask regarding sort of the numbers, sort of just looking at it, sort of says there's 1,980 children waiting to be matched, and then sort of 2,300 families not yet approved, 2,300 approved and waiting. So I appreciate it's very much a rolling sort of process. Children are coming in and being matched. But those numbers sort of seem sort of the number of families available seems quite high, and it kind of, but then compared to the children, you kind of think, well, you know, why are they not sort of maybe moving on faster? Yeah, I noticed, I think you said in the update that actually your figures are actually better than the national average, so that's reassuring. So I just wondered, you know, is there any particular backlog, or is that a normal kind of, are they the sort of figures that you would expect to find?
Sorry, which page are you looking at them?
I don't know, because I've moved on from it. I think it's fairly early on. Yeah, I don't know. See, it's across the whole partnership.
It might be national. So the current picture for Medway is that we currently have 17 approved and waiting adopters available, and there is one Medway child who we're actively family finding for, who we have no link. And as soon as we have a placement order granted, we identify, do we have anyone internal, and if not, we can immediately look externally. And the challenge always is that we may have 50 approved and waiting adopters, but whether they would be able to meet that particular child's needs. So the child that's currently we're family finding for has a really high level of complex needs and some disabilities, and we're looking nationally for him. But what we always want to do is ensure we have enough of a range of a pool of adopters available for your children, so that we can hopefully place with one of our adopters, but we don't ever delay in going externally. And where we have approved and waiting adopters, we have a number of black approved and waiting adopters, and I'm currently working with RAAs in London, so Adopt London West and Adopt London South, at looking at how our resource of adopters can support their children as well. So yeah.
Thank you. My other just question was regarding sibling placement. So I noticed in the report, I think with regards to Medway, it was 13 children placed in 22-23, but no siblings. So I just wanted, is that they were all 13 from separate families, or it's just that the siblings couldn't be placed together?
So yes, so we've recently actually placed a sibling group of 2 from Medway. We have a project currently taking place, which we got funding from the DFE to really look at extending our own pool of adopters for sibling groups, and being able to support Medway social workers in making decisions for siblings around completing a specialist assessment, which is called Together or Apart. We absolutely want to keep children together, and where we can, we do, and there have been a number of sibling placements across the region. And what's really exciting from this project is I've seen an increase of adopters coming through wanting to take on siblings. So actually it feels very healthy, but sometimes, and social workers are good at assessing, sometimes the children's needs are too complex. Their levels of trauma they've experienced means they'd be best met separately. However, what's really important, and what we're trying to help our judiciary see, that if the difficult decision is to separate, that we have lots and lots of really positive stories where we've placed siblings separately, but they continue to have a really meaningful relationship. We've got sets of adopters that all go on holidays together and meet up for birthdays and Christmas and things like that. So it's not always, sometimes it can actually be completely right to separate a sibling, but where we can, we always want to place them together.
Thank you. And I don't know if that's something we could just, I don't know if that's something we could ask in the recommendation, maybe data on that. So, because I just felt it wasn't clear in the reports whether there just weren't any sibling groups, or just that we couldn't place them. Yeah, so if that could be maybe sort of made a little bit clearer.
Absolutely, I can get that for you very quickly.
How well we're working on that, and when they can't be, for, like you say, for that there are perhaps reasons, you know, very good, valid reasons for that. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? Can I just quickly ask, when you can't put sibling groups together, are there any chances for link-up, birthdays, parties, parks?
So as I said, we have some really brilliant adopters who've adopted siblings that haven't been able to be placed together. They go away on holidays together. They have parties together. There's a lot of regular interactions there.
Lovely, thank you. Donna? Oh, sorry, Leah.
So it was on the sibling. Oh, is it always, if siblings are separated, is it always because a social worker has assessed that that's the best thing for the child, or is it sometimes because we don't have enough adopters to take on sibling groups?
Yeah.
So that was on.
No, it's a good question. So is it a resource issue? And actually I feel very confident, and especially with Medway, because there are live examples where decisions have been made that the priority is to keep the siblings together, but their needs are so high that actually their needs are better met in foster care. And there are some children that Donna and I are aware of where that difficult decision's been made to actually, Medway have amazing foster carers that are very well trained and very well equipped. And as much as we prepare our adopters want to be parents. They don't want to be professional. So there are some children that Medway have made that decision to keep the siblings together, and they remain in foster care.
About adopters wanting to be parents, that was my other question, was obviously there's no obligation on someone who adopts to tell the child that they're adopted. So if that parent then decides to not, do we still engage with, because a lot of the engagement was around kind of big, massive activities with other adopted children. Yeah. If that parent chooses not to tell them, do we still offer kind of more quiet engagement with the adopted parents?
Yeah. Thankfully, adoption has really moved on, and all of our adopters tell the children that they're adopted. We, as an adoption agency, we write the life story books, so every child that we place for adoption gets given a book that tells their life story, and our adopters are fully, I say signed up, but it's not. We do the preparation around the fact that actually that's the expectation, that you have to be honest from the child from day one. And it's amazing, some of our applicants, we had a consultation event this evening actually, and applicants will come and not be aware of that. And actually, because there is so much emphasis on that, if they're not comfortable with that, they won't stay in the process because it isn't negotiable.
Donna?
So just for me, I'd like to assure you all that I think we are very pleased with the arrangement with the RAA. I think it's made a massive difference to Medway's children. I'd be confident, we have a lot of oversight of obviously all of our adoption work. We're responsible for all of those children, and a lot of effort goes into making sure that we get the best outcomes, and the RAA have definitely improved our children's outcomes. You've only got to look at that data about, although we've got some challenges with the court system and that slows things down for children, we are making better decisions, I think. We're getting better outcomes, and children are finding forever families, and that's what it's about, really. So I think the arrangement, certainly from my perspective as the person that's responsible for all those children, I think we're very happy.
Lovely, thank you very much. So, Vice Chair.
I move that the committee notes the report and that we receive the data on sibling groups.
Is that seconded? George, thank you. And agreed? Thank you all, and thank you, Amy. It was just a great read and made me feel like Tigger. Thank you.
I have brought with me our latest newsletter. I've got copies of it, so I'll pass it round and you can take a copy home to read it. I think it gives a real flavour of the adoption community that we have in Medway, Kent and Bexley. So I'll pass those. Yeah, perfect.
Thank you so much. Okay, we're on to item 8, Adolescent Services. And Donna, it's over to you.
I'm going to pick it up, but knowing we're tight on the schedule, I'm not going to talk a lot. I'm going to probably open more for questions. But just to say, you'll know that I think we were asked to come back and bring a a brief update to you on where we were with the Adolescent Service. You'll know it's something we've had since 2020, and I think it'd be fair to say we've struggled to resource it effectively and do the quality of work we want. The inspection last year in summer identified that. We knew that already. It wasn't like it was a secret or a surprise to us. We already had some work going on, and we had a plan to look at restructuring that. But we didn't want to do it before the inspection because it wasn't the right time. And since that time, we've taken action, as you'll see in the report, to progress that restructure. And that basically means that we've moved the adolescent team, rather than having it in one small place, which hasn't got enough resilience, we've moved those children's casework across the Children's Social Work Service to provide a bit more of an extensive support package around it, and we've put some extra managerial posts in that service to try to manage that. And we're working with the commissioning team to try to create better capacity for some specialist support services to wrap around it. So I'm not going to talk beyond that, but I'll just take questions if that's okay.
Any questions? Mark? George?
Yeah, no, I very much welcome this report, thank you, because apart from anything else, I asked for a report to come. I was a little bit concerned about the Ofsted not giving adolescent services as high a grading as they did for the children's services generally. So I mean, I suppose my first question of two questions would be, are officers now satisfied that we're heading in the right direction on this, and that by the time of the next Ofsted, you know, are there any circumstances which they can foresee whereby we wouldn't be up to the standard of service delivery that we are in the rest of children's services? I was almost going to say that we wouldn't be up to good, but I would hope that by the next survey, the next Ofsted will be even higher than, even better than good in children's services as a whole. My other question was really, and unfortunately my screen has gone blank temporarily, but I think it was around about para 2.8, around about the management of the service and that sort of thing. How does it tie in, how does it join up with support for young people's mental health? We heard earlier about the support which is being given to early years and making sure there was food and nutrition, and I welcome the answers to those questions about 2.5 hours ago. But in terms of where we are at the other end, at the sort of teenage adolescent end, where are we in terms of support for mental health? How does the service tie up with CAMS, both in terms of giving young people support while they're waiting to see mental health services, but also is there any throughput afterwards? You know, do we follow up, do social workers follow up post the CAMS process or a formal CAMS appointment? You know, do we follow through after that process has taken place, or do we tend to sort of pass off mental health issues to the NHS and not be actively involved thereafter? I suppose it's issues around that which concern me. How we join up with other agencies generally might be a third question, Chair.
Yes, thanks, Mark. I have to say, Eilish has spoken to me about some mental health work that's being commissioned. So I'd like you to hold that question for when we're discussing that as well, please.
Yeah, I'm very happy to hold a question, Chair. Thank you.
George.
Yeah, mine's very quick, and I always like it when I get to agree with Mark. So it was very similar on the first question, but it was just also to say thank you, Donna, for, I know we had some engagement on this, and I appreciated that, and I think this is going to contribute positively towards the next Dial-Acts inspection. So appreciate that engagement on this from the opposition. Thank you.
Thank you, George. And lastly, Leah.
My laptop's died, but the gist of it was just how will this be assessed that it's working? So it's obviously there's quite a bit of restructuring things, just what metrics will we measure it against?
Thank you, Donna.
Right, I'll give that my best shot. So I think, are we satisfied we're going in the right direction? Yes. So I think we've done the right thing, because I don't think the service had the resilience, and I think we tested it for a really long time. And I think some of that's about the market around social workers and the availability, and because it's a very specialist kind of work. And I think also you've got a lot of risk, and it all sits in a really small team, and that's a lot of strain for a small team. If you're in a really big local authority, it'd probably be a bit different, and you see a very different model. But I think we really struggled with the resilience for a small team to hold all the risk, and then we couldn't recruit. And that was not a good model. It wasn't working. So we knew that. We told Ofsted that when they came. So we were quite straightforward about saying that it was an area for weakness for us. So I think we've moved it in the right direction, but I think this stuff takes time. So it'll take time to improve practice around those young people, the casework around that quite specialist area. So to suggest that we'll get it up to the same direction as the rest of our casework by the time Ofsted come back, which will probably be the summer, which is just a few months away. They'll come back for some sort of focus visit. That to suggest we'll have it at the same quality, I think not. But I think we'll have it at better quality than we had it at last year, because we've got better management oversight, we've got better capacity in the service and more social work wraparound. And we've also taken some action to try to put some extra support services around those young people. So that will take us a bit of time to get that working. We only moved the service just weeks ago, and it will take a bit of time to get that up and running and the quality of practice to really come in line with that. So I think I'd be hesitant to say it will be the same space, and I'd probably be a bit remiss to tell you that. But it will be in a better place than it was last summer. Our management of the service, so that join up of the support really across it. So every young person will have the same access to CAM services as any other young person who we refer. When we've got a CAM service involved, if we're involved with an adolescent, they do have a wraparound support package, so they'll have an allocated social worker, and that social worker should work on all different aspects of the young person's well-being and their care, so from their education through to their mental health and well-being and all of those services, and that should really happen as part of a child in need plan that should be really joined up across the various aspects of that child's life, really. And some of the work we've been doing with James's service is to strengthen, or we're in the process of trying to strengthen the commissioned arrangements so we can get some more specialist things in, like some young people will be gang affiliated, some of them will be really high risk of exploitation and county lines, and we need some really specialist intervention around that. And some of those young people really do need mental health support, and we absolutely would follow up if there's a CAMS intervention, it's part of the child in need plan, we'd be making sure that those young people are getting access to the services they need. And I think that kind of covers up that join up with other agency. Our adolescent offer involve those young people who have got missing episodes, exploitation, some gang affiliation, all those different issues that young people get. We have a multidisciplinary approach to that, so we've got a strategic group that oversees those missing and exploitation concerns and joins up all of the threads of intelligence and information sharing they need to have. There's multidisciplinary work around missing, children who are missing, which will be this group, to make sure that we're looking at risk in a joined up way as a partnership with police, with YOS, with whichever bit of the service that young person has a plan around, really. And our mental health services and other services would be involved in that. School, you know, anyone that's part of that child's life with the family, we'd be looking at together to try to ensure that we're trying to reduce risk as best as we can. I think that's probably captured everyone's. Lee, I can't remember what was your I think there was just one last question I may have missed. Have I captured you?
Yeah, it was covered in there. It was just how will we make sure it's working. But
yeah, I think so for measuring the metrics of how it's working. So like any part of our system that we've got that quality assurance oversight. We've got an action plan around this about making sure that it's implemented and followed up. We've put in assistant team managers for extra capacity as well. So when we reconfigured the service, we moved the capacity into this bit to try and give it strength. So it's got some extra management oversight. And what that'll be, what we'll do as part of that is we'll go in and dip sample and audit those young people's casework. So, for example, I've been auditing these children because we've been worried about them. I've been doing that with the heads of service ourselves, as well as our quality assurance service, having a look, testing whether we think it's okay, which is how we got to the place where we knew it wasn't okay, was because we're going in and checking that all the time. And that will carry on.
Lovely, Donna. Thank you so much. Thank you. Okay, we're on to the work programme item. Oh, sorry. We need to agree first. I'm so excited that we're on number 10. Vice Chair.
So I move that the committee notes the report and agree that further adolescent updates will be included annually within the Missing and Exploitation Annual Report.
Is that seconded?
Yes.
Thank you, Paula. Thank you. That's agreed. Work programme, item 10. Stephanie.
The only thing that I wanted to bring up was that you've probably noticed for the March meeting, we have an item on there for procurement of children's mental health services. So there'll be a paper coming from the ICB on this in March. They have sent me some background information to share with the committee. I didn't want to share it this week whilst we had all this information to take in. So I will be sending something out to you tomorrow. It's just background reading. It does look like a lot, but just bear in mind that we will have a paper and we will have the ICB here in March.
Okay. And Eilish has been in touch with me. I attended some mental health workshops with some staff and officers, and what we need to be looking towards is the ICB would like to work with the Children and Young People ONS Committee to deliver a session on commissioning. That's the plan to understand all the proposals and the model for a consultation. And the idea is to develop an insight and an understanding so that we are able to come up and make a decision. And that's in partnership with Kent Health. And I know some of you sit on the Health Committee as well. So, and we're hoping that that will be done and achieved by February.
So it's just really asking the committee if that's something that they would like to take up. So we can arrange like a special meeting with the ICB in February to go through this. And then we'd still have a paper in March at our formal committee.
That's agreed. Thank you, everybody.
So it's more of an administrative comment. So as I read through various committee reports, I see complete inconsistency, and it is for democratic services. So I'm still seeing chairman being used in reports. On page 219 here, it has chairman, vice chairman, and opposition spokesperson. Could I ask democratic services to be more consistent in the use of chairperson, vice chairperson moving forward? Many of us do not identify.
That was probably an oversight on my part in this, for this report, but yeah, it's something I'll take back.
Vice Chairperson.
I hadn't finished writing the notes, but I'll go with it. I move that we note the report and agree the work programme as set out in Appendix 1 to the report, subject to accepting the proposed changes outlined in italic text on Appendix 1. plus a special meeting with the ICB to talk about mental health services commissioning?
It's for us to have an informal meeting with them in February to go through their proposals, but they will officially be coming in March to our formal meeting.
And the committee recommends the full council to make the following appointments: that Alice Pledger be appointed the teacher position on the committee for a 2-year term, that Bruno Linett be appointed as a name substitute to the teacher position on the committee for a 2-year term, that Leanna Rogers be appointed to the head teacher position on the committee for a 2-year term, and that Vicky Aspin be appointed as a name substitute to the head teacher position on the committee for a 2-year term.
Thank you. And is that seconded? Thank you, George. And is that agreed? Thank you so much. There was a lot of reading tonight, but really good discussion. Well done, everybody. And it wasn't very warming here either. Good night and safe journeys home.
home.